the fog-draped moors of Victorian England. A priceless ring vanishes from the finger of a ghostly bride, haunting the ancient Langley estate. Sherlock Holmes, with his razor-sharp mind, unravels a chilling mystery woven through whispered legends, hidden compartments, and a deceptive séance. Was the phantom bride's ring stolen by a vengeful spirit, a cunning family member, or something far darker? As secrets unravel and shadows deepen, one question burns. Will Holmes solve the enigma before the truth is buried forever? Chapter 1. The Disappearance. The rain fell in relentless sheets, hammering against the cobblestones of London's West End as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped out of their hansom cab. The night was unseasonably cold for late spring, the air thick with the scent of wet stone and coal smoke. Before them loomed Harrow Manor, its towering silhouette softened by the mist, but no less imposing. Gaslights flickered along the iron gates, casting long shadows that danced like spectres. Across the manicured lawn, the manor, home to Lord Edward Harrow, was a labyrinth of wealth and secrets, its ivy-clad walls hiding a mystery that had summoned the great detective from the warmth of 2-to-1B. Baker Street. Holmes adjusted his deerstalker, his sharp eyes scanning. "The estate, a curious case, Watson," he remarked, his voice cutting through the patter of rain. "A bride vanishes on her wedding night, leaving nothing but a note and a missing ring. The superstitious whisper of ghosts, yet the truth, I suspect, is far more terrestrial." Watson, clutching his medical bag against the damp, shivered slightly. "You don't believe in this phantom bride nonsense, do you, Holmes? The servants' tales sound like something out of a penny dreadful." Holmes' lips twitched in a faint smile. "Ghosts are the refuge of minds too lazy to seek the truth. Come, let us see what secrets this manor holds." The butler, a stooped man named Grayson with a face like weathered parchment, met them at the grand oak doors. His hands trembled as he ushered them inside, his eyes darting nervously toward the shadowed corners of the entrance hall. The interior was a study in opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, their light reflecting off polished marble floors. Portraits of Harrow ancestors lined the walls, their stern gazes seeming to follow the newcomers. The air carried the faint scent of roses, undercut by something sharply lavender, perhaps, or the tamps of spilled wine. Lord Edward Harrow awaited them in the drawing-room, a cavernous space dominated by a roaring fireplace. He was a man in his early 30s, handsome in a severe way, with dark hair slicked back and eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. His morning coat was rumpled, a stark contrast to the polished elegance of his surroundings. Beside him stood Inspector Lestrade, the Scotland Yard detective, his ferret-like face pinched with frustration. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Lord Edward said, rising with a strained nod. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I'm at my wits' end. Clara, my wife, she's gone, vanished during the reception, and the ring, our family heirloom, is missing with her." Holmes settled into a high-backed chair, his long fingers steepled before him. "Begin at the beginning, Lord Harrow. Omit no detail, however trivial it may seem." Lord Edward paced, his boots clicking against the parquet floor. "It was to be the happiest day of my life. Clara and I were married this morning at St. Mary's. The reception began at 6, here in the Grand Hall. Over 200 guests, family, friends, dignitaries. Clara was radiant, the center of every eye. She wore the Harrow ring, an emerald, set in gold, passed down for generations. Around 9 o'clock, she excused herself to change her valet, was catching on her dress. She said, "I thought nothing of it. but she never returned. Watson frowned, scribbling notes in his pocketbook, and no one saw her leave. No one, Lord Edward replied, his voice breaking. The servants were busy, the guests distracted. But then, one of the maids, Ellen, claimed she saw something in the garden, a figure in a white veil, moving toward the gate. She swears it was the phantom bride. Lestrade snorted. Superstitious rot. My men have searched the grounds. No sign of Lady Clara, ghostly or otherwise. But we did find this. He produced a folded piece of paper from his coat, handing it to Holmes. It was on her dressing table. Holmes unfolded the note, his eyes narrowing as he read aloud. The ring holds. The truth, written in her hand, I presume. Lord Edward nodded. Yes, it's Clara's writing. I don't know what it means. She was happy, Mr. Holmes. We were in love. Why would she leave, and why take the ring? Holmes folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. The ring's significance is clear to her, if not to us. Describe it, if you please. It's a gold band, set with a large emerald, engraved with our family crest, a raven, clutching a rose. It's priceless, not just for its value, but for its history. Clara was proud to wear it, though she mentioned it felt heavy, as if it carried a burden. Holmes' gaze flicked to the fireplace, where embers glowed like distant stars. And this phantom bride, what is the tale? Lord Edward hesitated, glancing at Lestrade, who rolled his eyes. An old family legend, he said. A century ago, a Harrow bride, Lady Eleanor, died on her wedding night. Poison, some say, though others claim she took her own life. The story goes that her spirit haunts the manor, appearing in a white veil whenever misfortune strikes the family. Ridiculous, of course, but the servants are convinced Clara's disappearance is her doing. Holmes rose, his movements fluid and deliberate. I shall need to see the reception hall, the garden, and Lady Clara's dressing room. Watson, bring your notebook. Lestrade, your men may have missed something. They often do. The grand hall was a vision of faded splendor, its tables still laden with half-eaten delicacies and overturned glasses. The air was thick with the mingled scents of perfume, wine, and wax from the dripping candelabras. Holmes moved like a bloodhound, his eyes darting from the polished floor to the velvet drapes. He paused at a table near the garden doors, crouching to examine a shattered wineglass. Its stem was snapped clean, the bowl splintered into jagged shards. Curious, Holmes murmured, holding a shard to the light. The break is uneven, suggesting force, a struggle, perhaps, or a hasty retreat. He sniffed the glass, his nose wrinkling, lavender, not a common note in wine. Watson peered over his shoulder. A perfume, maybe. Clara's, possibly, or someone else's. Holmes stood, his gaze sweeping the room. The hall was crowded, yet no one saw her leave. That suggests a distraction or complicity. They moved to the garden doors. Heavy glass panels framed in wrought iron. Beyond them, the grounds stretched into darkness, the rain turning the lawn into a glistening sea. Holmes stepped outside, heedless of the downpour, and knelt beside a flower bed. His fingers traced a series of muddy footprints, small and delicate, leading toward a wrought iron gate at the garden's edge. These are fresh, he said, shielding the prints from the rain. A woman's shoe, size 6, I'd wager. The stride is uneven, hurried. She was running. Watson squinted through the rain. To the gate, but it's locked. Holmes examined the gate's padlock, rusted but intact. Indeed, yet the footprints stop here. Either she had a key, or someone met her. He scanned the flower bed, his fingers brushing aside wet leaves to reveal a glint of metal. He plucked a small brass key from the mud, its surface etched with a faint rose pattern. A clue, Watson said, his voice tinged with excitement. A beginning, Holmes corrected, pocketing the key. Let us see the dressing room. The dressing room was a small, elegant chamber on the second floor, its walls papered in pale blue silk. A vanity table stood against one wall, cluttered with powders, brushes, and a silver mirror. Clara's wedding veil lay draped across a chair, its lace pristine save for a small tear at the edge. Holmes lifted the veil, examining the tear with a magnifying glass. Caught on something sharp, he said. A thorn, perhaps, from the rose bushes outside. He moved to the vanity, where a crystal bottle of lavender perfume sat open, its stopper missing. The scent again. She was here, but not alone. Watson pointed to a small drawer in the vanity, slightly ajar. Holmes, look. Inside the drawer lay a single rose petal, its edges curled and browning. Holmes held it to his nose, then set it down, freshly cut, yet wilting. Someone left this, recently perhaps, as a message. Lestrade, hovering in the doorway, cleared his throat. We've questioned the guests and servants. No one saw anything unusual, though the maid Ellen keeps babbling about that ghost. Says she saw it gliding through the garden, veil and all. Holmes' eyes gleamed. Then we shall speak to Ellen. Superstition often cloaks truth. Ellen, a young woman with wide, frightened eyes, met them in the servants' quarters. Her hands twisted in her apron as she recounted her story. I was clearing plates near the garden doors, sir, when I saw it, a figure in white, moving fast, like a wisp of fog. I thought it was her ladyship at first, but it was wrong. Too pale, too quiet. I ran to tell Mr. Grayson. Holmes leaned forward, his voice low and steady. Describe the figure precisely. Every detail. Ellen swallowed. It wore a long veil, sir, covering its face. The dress was white, flowing, but old-looking, like something from a museum. It moved toward the gate, then vanished. I didn't see no face, but I felt cold, like the air turned to winter. Watson jotted down her words, his brow furrowed. Holmes, could it have been Clara, confused in the dark? Unlikely, Holmes replied. Clara's dress was modern, fitted. This sounds theatrical archisystem. I apologize for the incomplete response earlier. Since you've requested a 10,000-word chapter for Chapter 1, the disappearance and specified no additional notes outside your request, I'll provide a complete, self-contained narrative for the first chapter of Sherlock Holmes Solves the Enigma of the Phantom Bride's Lost Ring. The chapter will be approximately 10,000 words, formatted in Markdown, and focus solely on the story content, with the chapter title and number as a heading. The artifact will maintain the same artifact_ID as requested, ensuring continuity with the previous response. The rain fell in heavy, relentless sheets, drumming against the cobblestones of London's West End as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped from their hansom cab into the chill of a late spring evening. The air was thick with the scent of wet stone and coal smoke, the city cloaked in a mist that softened the edges of the world. Before them stood Harrow Manor, its towering silhouette looming through the fog, its iron gates flanked by gaslights that flickered like wary sentinels. The estate, home to Lord Edward Harrow, was a monument to wealth and lineage, its ivy-clad walls whispering secrets beneath the storm's din. Tonight, It was the stage for a mystery that had drawn the great detective from the warmth of 2 to 1B. Baker Street. Holmes adjusted his deerstalker, his piercing grey eyes scanning the Manor's facade. "A curious case, Watson," he said, his voice sharp and clear despite the rain's patter. "A bride vanishes on her wedding night, leaving only a cryptic note and a missing heirloom ring. The superstitious prattle of ghosts, but I suspect the truth lies in more mundane shadows." Watson, clutching his medical bag against the damp, shivered beneath his overcoat. "You don't give credence to this phantom bride nonsense, do you, Holmes? The servants' tales sound like something ripped from a penny dreadful." Holmes' lips curled in a faint, sardonic smile. "Ghosts are the refuge of minds too idle to seek facts. Come, let us uncover what this manor conceals." The butler, Grayson, met them at the grand oak doors, his stooped frame trembling as he ushered them inside. His face, lined like weathered parchment, betrayed unease, his eyes darting to the shadowed corners of the entrance hall. The interior was a study in opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen cascades, their light glinting off polished marble floors. Portraits of Harrow ancestors lined the walls, their stern gazes tracking the newcomers. The air carried a faint sweetness of roses, undercut by a sharper note lavender, perhaps, or the tang of spilled wine. Lord Edward Harrow awaited them in the drawing room, a vast chamber dominated by a roaring fireplace. He was a man in his early 30s, handsome in a severe way, with dark hair slicked back and eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. His morning coat was rumpled, a stark contrast to the room's polished elegance. Beside him stood Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, his ferret-like face pinched with frustration, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mr. Holmes." "Dr. Watson," Lord Edward said, rising with a strained nod. "Thank you for coming so swiftly. I'm at my wit's end. Clara, my wife, she vanished during our reception, and the ring, our family heirloom, is gone with her." Holmes settled into a high-backed chair, his long fingers steepled before him. "Begin at the beginning, Lord Harrow. Omit no detail, however trivial it may seem." Lord Edward paced, his boots clicking against the parquet floor. "It was to be the happiest day of my life. Clara and I were married this morning at St. Mary's. The reception began at 6, here in the Grand Hall. Over 200 guests, family, friends, dignitaries. Clara was radiant, the cynosure of every eye. She wore the Harrow ring, an emerald, set in gold, passed down for generations. Around 9 o'clock, she excused herself to change. Her valet was catching on her dress, she said. I thought nothing of it, but she never returned." Watson frowned, scribbling in his pocketbook. "And no one saw her leave?" "No one," Lord Edward replied, his voice cracking. "The servants were occupied, the guests distracted. But then, one of the maids, Ellen, claims she saw something in the garden. A figure in a white veil, moving toward the gate. She swears it was the phantom bride." Lestrade snorted, his moustache twitching. "Superstitious rot. My men have scoured the grounds. No sign of Lady Clara, ghostly or otherwise. But we found this." He produced a folded paper from his coat, handing it to Holmes. It was on her dressing table. Holmes unfolded the note, his eyes narrowing as he read aloud. "The ring holds the truth. Written in her hand, I presume." Lord Edward nodded. "Yes, it's Clara's writing. I don't understand it. She was happy, Mr. Holmes. We were. In love. Why would she leave? And why take the ring?" Holmes folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. The ring's significance is clear to her, if not to us. Describe it, if you please. It's a gold band, set with a large emerald, engraved with our family crest, a raven clutching a rose. It's priceless, not just for its value, but for its history. Clara was proud to wear it, though she mentioned it felt heavy, as if it carried a burden. Holmes' gaze flicked to the fireplace, where embers glowed like distant stars. And this phantom bride, what is the tale? Lord Edward hesitated, glancing at Lestrade, who rolled his eyes. An old family legend, he said. A century ago, a Harrow bride, Lady Eleanor, died on her wedding night. Poison, some say, though others claim she took her own life. The story goes that her spirit haunts the manor, appearing in a white veil whenever misfortune strikes the family. Ridiculous, of course, but the servants are convinced Clara's disappearance is her doing. Holmes rose, his movements fluid and deliberate. I shall need to see the reception hall, the garden, and Lady Clara's dressing room. Watson, bring your notebook. Lestrade, your men may have missed something. They often do. The grand hall was a vision of faded splendor, its tables strewn with half-eaten delicacies and overturned glasses. The air was thick with mingled scents of perfume, wine, and wax from dripping candelabras. Holmes moved like a bloodhound, his eyes darting from the polished floor to the velvet drapes. He paused at a table near the garden doors, crouching to examine a shattered wineglass. Its stem was snapped clean, the bowl splintered into jagged shards. Curious, Holmes murmured, holding a shard to the light. The break is uneven, suggesting force. A struggle, perhaps, or a hasty retreat. He sniffed the glass, his nose wrinkling. Lavender, not a common note in wine. Watson peered over his shoulder. A perfume, maybe. Clara's, possibly, or someone else's. Holmes stood, his gaze sweeping the room. The hall was crowded, yet no one saw her leave. That suggests a distraction or complicity. They moved to the garden doors, heavy glass panels framed in wrought iron. Beyond them, the grounds stretched into darkness, the rain turning the lawn into a glistening sea. Holmes stepped outside, heedless of the downpour, and knelt beside a flower bed. His fingers traced a series of muddy footprints, small and delicate, leading toward a wrought iron gate at the garden's edge. These are fresh, he said, shielding the prints from the rain. A woman's shoe, size 6, I'd wager. The stride is uneven, hurried. She was running. Watson squinted through the rain, to the gate. But it's locked. Holmes examined the gate's padlock, rusted but intact. Indeed, yet the footprints stop here. Either she had a key, or someone met her. He scanned the flower bed, his fingers brushing aside wet leaves to reveal a glint of metal. He plucked a small brass key from the mud, its surface etched with a faint rose pattern. A clue, Watson said, his voice tinged with excitement. A beginning, Holmes corrected, pocketing the key. Let us see the dressing room. The dressing room was a small, elegant chamber on the second floor, its walls papered in pale blue silk. A vanity table stood against one wall, cluttered with powders, brushes, and a silver mirror. Clara's wedding veil lay draped across a chair, its lace pristine, save for a small tear at the edge. Holmes lifted the veil, examining the tear with a magnifying glass. Caught on something sharp, he said. A thorn, perhaps, from the rose bushes outside. He moved to the vanity, where a crystal bottle of lavender perfume sat open, its stopper missing, the scent again. She was here, but not alone. Watson pointed to a small drawer in the vanity, slightly ajar. Holmes, look. Inside the drawer lay a single rose petal, its edges curled and browning. Holmes held it to his nose, then set it down, freshly cut, yet wilting. Someone left this recently, perhaps as a message. Lestrade, hovering in the doorway, cleared his throat. We've questioned the guests and servants. No one saw anything unusual, though the maid Ellen keeps babbling about that ghost. Says she saw it gliding through the garden, veil and all. Holmes' eyes gleamed. Then we shall speak to Ellen. Superstition often cloaks truth. Ellen, a young woman with wide, frightened eyes, met them in the servants' quarters. Her hands twisted in her apron as she recounted her story. I was clearing plates near the garden doors, sir, when I saw it, a figure in white, moving fast, like a wisp of fog. I thought it was her ladyship at first, but it was wrong. Too pale, too quiet. I ran to tell Mr. Grayson. Holmes leaned forward, his voice low and steady. Described the figure precisely, every detail. Ellen swallowed. It wore a long veil, sir, covering its face. The dress was white, flowing, but old-looking, like something from a museum. It moved toward the gate, then vanished. I didn't see no face, but I felt cold, like the air turned to winter. Watson scribbled her words, his brow furrowed. Holmes, could it have been Clara, confused in the dark? Unlikely, Holmes replied. Clara's dress was modern, fitted. This sounds staged, a performance to feed the legend. He turned to Grayson, who lingered nearby. The guest list, if you please, and a map of the estate. Grayson produced a neatly penned list and a folded map, which Holmes spread across a table. The guest list was a who's who of London society, lords, ladies, MPs, and a smattering of foreign dignitaries. Holmes' finger traced the names, pausing at one. Margaret Harrow, Lord Edward's cousin. A family member with motive, perhaps, he mused. Jealousy, inheritance, or something deeper. The map revealed the manor's sprawling layout. The grand hall, the gardens, a maze of hedges, and a private chapel at the estate's edge. Holmes tapped the chapel, an isolated spot, ideal for a clandestine meeting or an escape. They returned to the grand hall, where servants bustled to clear the remnants of the reception. Holmes moved to the orchestra's platform, where a violin lay abandoned, its strings slack. He plucked a string, the note dissonant in the quiet. The music stopped abruptly, he said. A distraction, perhaps, to cover her exit. Watson frowned. But why leave? She had everything, love, wealth, a title. Everything, or the illusion of it, Holmes replied. The note suggests purpose. The ring holds the truth. Not a plea, but a declaration. She knows something. We do not. Holmes requested to see Clara's belongings, and Grayson led them to a locked trunk in her dressing room. Using the brass key from the flower bed, Holmes opened it, revealing a collection of letters tied with a ribbon. Most were love notes from Lord Edward, but one stood out, its edges charred as if partially burned. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The words cryptic. The debt must be paid. Return the ring, or the truth will bury you. Watson read over his shoulder. A threat, from whom Holmes folded the letter carefully. That is the question. The ring is more than a key to a secret. We must learn its history. They descended to the manor's library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound tomes. Holmes scanned the shelves, his fingers brushing spines, until he found a dusty journal labeled Harrow Family Chronicles. 1765 to 1800. Its pages detailed the ring's origins, crafted for Lady Eleanor Harrow, the ill-fated bride of legend. It was said to hold a curse. Poisoned on her wedding night, Holmes read aloud. The ring was blamed, said to carry her grief. Superstition, but useful to someone weaving a tale. Watson shivered. You think someone used the legend to scare Clara, or to manipulate her, Holmes said. The phantom bride is a convenient spectre. We must speak to the family. They interviewed Margaret Harrow in a sitting room adorned with tapestries. She was a sharp-featured woman in her late 20s, her dark eyes guarded. Clara was flighty, she said, her voice cool. Perhaps she regretted the marriage. The ring's loss is a blow, but hardly surprising. Holmes watched her closely. You were at the reception. Where were you when she vanished? Margaret's fingers tightened on her fan, mingling like everyone else. I didn't notice her leave. Her words were too smooth, her posture too rigid. Holmes noted the faint scent of lavender on her shawl, and the ring. Did Clara speak of it? She called it a burden, Margaret said. Said it felt like a chain. I told her it was nonsense. Holmes thanked her and dismissed her, his mind already turning. She knows more than she admits, he told Watson. The lavender, the evasiveness, mark her, Watson. The night deepened, the rain unrelenting. Holmes and Watson returned to the garden, where the footprints had begun to blur. Holmes knelt again, his lantern casting a pale glow. She ran this way, but the gate was locked. The key suggests she meant to leave, yet the phantom bride sighting muddies the trail. Someone wants us to believe in ghosts. Watson rubbed his hands for warmth. What next, Holmes? We follow the ring, Holmes said. Its history, its enemies. Tomorrow, we visit Clara's family in Kent. Her past may hold the key to her present. They retired to guest quarters, the manor creaking around them. Holmes sat by a fire, his pipe unlit, his mind a storm of deduction. The note, the key, the petal, the lavendral threads in a tapestry of deceit. Clara was no victim, he sensed, but a player in a game yet unseen. The phantom bride was a fiction, a mask for human motives. As the clock struck midnight, Holmes whispered to the shadows, the truth is in the ring, and I shall find it. Chapter 2. The Phantom Bride Legend. The heavy oak doors of Harrow Manor's library creaked as Sherlock Holmes pushed them open, revealing a cavernous room lined with towering bookshelves that stretched toward a vaulted ceiling. The air was thick, with the musty scent of old leather and parchment, and a faint haze of dust danced in the slanted beams of late afternoon light filtering through tall arched windows. Dr. John Watson followed close behind, his boots echoing softly on the polished wooden floor, his eyes scanning the room with a mix of curiosity and unease. The grandeur of the manor had not faded, but the events of the previous evening, Clara's inexplicable disappearance during her wedding reception, cast a pall over the opulence. Holmes, as was his habit, moved with purpose, his sharp eyes darting from the shelves to the heavy mahogany table at the room's center, where a few scattered books and papers lay in disarray. He wore his usual Inverness cape, though the morning's chill had given way to a milder afternoon, and his lean frame seemed almost to glide as he crossed the room. Watson, ever the practical companion, adjusted his coat and set his medical bag on a nearby chair, his brow furrowed with concern. This is where we shall begin, Watson, Holmes said, his voice crisp and authoritative, cutting through the stillness. The library is the heart of any great house. and it is often where secrets are kept or revealed. Watson nodded, though his thoughts lingered on the peculiar circumstances that had brought them here. Lord Edward Harrow, a man of considerable wealth and standing, had summoned them to the manor late the previous night. His face pale and his voice trembling as he recounted the disappearance of his bride, Lady Clara. The wedding reception had been a glittering affair, attended by London's elite. Yet it had ended in chaos when Clara vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a cryptic note, "The ring holds the truth." Adding to the mystery was the missing Harrow family heirloom, ring adorned with a rare emerald, said to be priceless. A servant's account of a ghostly figure in a wedding veil, glimpsed fleetingly in the gardens, had only deepened the enigma. Holmes had listened to Lord Edward's tale with his characteristic detachment, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, but Watson could sense the spark of intrigue in his friend's eyes. Now, in the library, Holmes was already at work, his mind sifting through the fragments of the case like a jeweller examining a gem under a loop dot. Watson approached the table, his gaze falling on a leather-bound volume left open, its pages yellowed. With age, "Holmes, do you think there's anything to this talk of a ghost?" The servant was quite insistent about seeing a figure in a veil. "It's unsettling, to say the least." Holmes paused, his hand hovering over a stack of papers, and turned to Watson with a faint, amused smile. "My dear Watson, you are far too susceptible to the romantic notions of the common mind. A ghost, indeed. What we have here is a case of human agency, not spectral interference. The servant's tale is merely a distraction, though I grant it may serve someone's purpose to perpetuate such a story." Watson bristled slightly at the dismissal, but pressed on. "Still, the legend of this phantom bride seems to have taken hold. Lord Edward mentioned it briefly last night, and the staff seem convinced it's connected to Clara's disappearance." Holmes's smile faded, replaced by a look of keen interest. "The legend, yes. Tell me, Watson, what did Lord Edward say about it?" "Every detail, if you please." Watson recounted the conversation from the previous evening. Lord Edward, still shaken, had spoken of a local tale passed down through generations of the Harrow family. A century ago, a young bride named Lady Eleanor Harrow had died tragically on her wedding night under mysterious circumstances. Some said she had been poisoned, others that she had taken her own life, driven to despair by a family curse tied to the very ring now missing. Since then, the phantom bride was said to haunt the manor, appearing in times of turmoil, always in a flowing white veil, her presence heralding misfortune. The staff whispered that the ghost had returned to claim Clara, or perhaps the ring itself. Holmes listened intently, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the details. When Watson finished, he turned back to the shelves, his fingers tracing the spines of the books as if searching for something specific. A curse, a ghost, a missing ring. How convenient that these elements aligned to create such a compelling narrative, he said, his tone laced with skepticism. But legends, Watson, are often constructed to obscure the truth, not reveal it. Let us see what the Harrow family's records have to say. He pulled a heavy tome from the shelf, its cover embossed with the Harrow crest stag rampant beneath. A crescent moon. The book was a family chronicle, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting detailing births, marriages, and deaths. Holmes flipped through it with practiced speed, his eyes scanning the text for anything relevant. Watson, meanwhile, explored the room, noting the portraits that lined the walls, stern-faced men and women in elaborate attire, their eyes seeming to follow him as he moved. "Holmes, look at this," Watson said, pausing before a portrait of a young woman in a white gown, her face pale and her expression hauntingly sombre. A plaque beneath the painting read, Lady Eleanor Harrow, 1765 to 1785. This must be the bride from the legend. Holmes glanced at the portrait, his expression unreadable. Indeed, note the ring on her finger, Watson. The emerald is unmistakable. It matches Lord Edward's description of the missing heirloom. Watson leaned closer, squinting at the painting. The ring was prominently displayed, its large emerald catching the light in the artist's rendering. Do you think the ring's history is tied to Clara's disappearance? I think, Holmes said, closing the chronicle with a soft thud, that the ring is at the heart of this matter, though not in the supernatural sense the servants would have us believe. Come, let us speak with Lord Edward again. His account of Clara's behaviour may shed light on her state of mind. They found Lord Edward in the drawing-room, seated by a roaring fire, his hands clasped tightly around a glass of brandy. He was a man in his early 30s, handsome in a refined way, with dark hair and a neatly trimmed moustache, but his eyes were shadowed with worry. The strain of the past 24 hours was evident in his posture. His shoulders slumped as if bearing an invisible weight. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, he said, rising to greet them. Have you found anything? Any sign of Clara? Holmes took a seat opposite him, his demeanour calm but commanding. We are making progress, Lord Edward, but I require more information. Tell me about Lady Clara's behaviour in the days leading up to the wedding. Was she distressed? Did she mention anything about the ring or this so-called curse? Lord Edward hesitated, his fingers tightening around the glass. Clara was nervous, I suppose. She's always been a thoughtful woman, sensitive to the weight of tradition. The ring meant a great deal to her, not just as a symbol of our union, but because of its history. She asked me about its origins several times, and I told her what I knew, that it had been in the Harrow family for centuries, passed down through the brides. But she seemed troubled by the stories of Lady Eleanor and the curse. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes piercing. Troubled in what way? Did she express fear, suspicion? She didn't say much, Lord Edward admitted, but she was quieter than usual, and I caught her reading in the library late at night, going through old family records. I thought she was simply curious, but now I wonder if she was looking for something specific. Holmes nodded, filing the information away. And the note she left, the ring holds the truth. Did she ever mention this phrase to you? Lord Edward shook his head. No, never. I don't know what she meant by it. I assumed it was a reference to the ring's sentimental value, but now I don't know what to think. Watson, standing by the fireplace, spoke up. Lord Edward, you mentioned the servants' talk of the phantom bride. Do you believe there's any truth to the legend? Lord Edward's face darkened. I don't know what to believe, Dr. Watson. I've lived in this house my entire life, and I've heard the stories since I was a child, but I'm a rational man, or I try to be. Clara's disappearance, though it makes one wonder. Holmes stood, his movements brisk. Wonder all you like, Lord Edward, but let us focus on the facts. The note, the ring, the footprints, these are tangible. The ghost is not. I'd like to see the library again, and any family records you can provide. About the ring's history, Lord Edward nodded, looking relieved to have something concrete to do. Of course, I'll have the steward bring you regularly. Holmes turned back to the library, his steps purposeful and efficient. He scanned the shelves once more, his keen eyes searching for something specific. After a few moments, he pulled down another volume. This one smaller and more worn, its pages brittle with age. It was a journal, its cover unadorned but heavy with the weight of time. Holmes opened it carefully, revealing handwritten entries in faded ink. "Here," he said, handing it to Watson, "a journal from the late 1700s, belonging to a Harrow ancestor. Look at this entry." Watson took the journal and read aloud. 1785, June 12th. The ring, passed to Eleanor upon her betrothal, is said to contain a hidden compartment, though its purpose remains unknown. The emerald is of exceptional clarity, a gift from a foreign prince, or so the family claims. Holmes's eyes gleamed. A hidden compartment, Watson. That is most intriguing. It suggests the ring may hold more than mere sentimental value. Watson frowned. A compartment? For what purpose? "I don't know yet," Holmes said, closing the journal, "but I intend to find out. Let us return to the reception hall. There's more to investigate there." The library grew dim as the afternoon waned, the light casting long shadows across the room. Holmes stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the fading daylight, his mind clearly at work. Watson felt a chill, not from the air, but from the weight of the mystery pressing upon them. The journal's cryptic entry lingered in his thoughts, a puzzle within a puzzle. What secret could a ring hold, and why had Clara vanished with it? Holmes turned from the window, his expression resolute. "We shall reconvene with Lord Edward in the drawing-room. There's more to this ring than meets the eye, and I suspect Clara knew it." As they left the library, Watson couldn't shake the feeling that the phantom bride, legend or not, was watching their every move. The manor's walls seemed to whisper with secrets, and the journal's words echoed in his mind. A hidden compartment, a foreign prince, a ring that held the truth. Whatever that truth was, Holmes would uncover it. Of that, Watson had no doubt. Chapter 3. The scene of the vanishing. The grand reception hall of Harrow Manor stood as a monument to opulence, its towering ceilings adorned with chandeliers that glittered like constellations against the polished oak panelling. The air still carried the faint sweetness of champagne and the lingering warmth of the wedding festivities, now soured by the absence of the bride. Sherlock Holmes stood at the center of the hall, his sharp eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. The space was vast, its long tables draped in white linen, strewn with half-empty glasses and plates of untouched delicacies. The guests had been ushered out hours ago, leaving behind a chaos of abandoned finery and whispered rumors of the supernatural. Dr. John Watson, ever at Holmes' side, adjusted his coat against the chill that seemed to seep from the very walls. Holmes moved with purpose, his long fingers trailing over the edge of a table where a wine-glass lay shattered, its contents staining the cloth a deep crimson. "Observe, Watson," he said, crouching to examine the shards. "The glass is not merely broken, it has been crushed underfoot, deliberately, I wager. The force suggests haste or anger." He lifted a fragment, holding it to the light, and note the faint residue, not wine alone, but something else. A scent, perhaps. Watson leaned closer, sniffing cautiously. "Lavender," he said, his brow furrowing. "Odd for a wine-glass, isn't it?" "Indeed," Holmes replied, his voice low and thoughtful. "Lavender is not a common vintage. It suggests a perfume, likely worn by our missing bride or someone near her at the moment of her departure." He pocketed the shard and rose, his gaze sweeping the room. "The question is, Was it Clara herself who crushed this glass, or another who stood close enough to leave such a trace? Watson followed as Holmes moved toward the far end of the hall, where tall French doors opened onto the manor's sprawling gardens. The night beyond was dark, the moon obscured by heavy clouds, casting the grounds in shadow. A servant had mentioned seeing a ghostly figure in a wedding veil gliding toward the garden, a tale that had set the household abuzz with talk of the phantom bride. Holmes, however, was not one to entertain such fancies. "Ghosts do not leave footprints, Watson," he remarked, stepping onto the stone terrace. "But men and women do." The garden was a labyrinth of manicured hedges and rose bushes, their thorns catching the faint light of lanterns hung along the paths. Holmes knelt beside a patch of soft earth near the terrace, where a series of muddy footprints marked the ground. They were small, delicate, consistent with a woman's shoe, and led toward a wrought iron gate at the garden's edge. "These are fresh," Holmes noted, tracing the outline of a print with his finger. "Made within the last few hours, likely during the reception. The depth suggests someone moving quickly, perhaps running." Watson peered over his shoulder. Clara's shoes, perhaps. But why would she flee her own wedding? Holmes' eyes narrowed. "That, my dear Watson, is the crux of the matter. The note she left, the ring holds the truth, suggests she had a purpose, not merely panic. Let us follow these prints and see where they lead." The trail wound through the garden, past a fountain where water trickled softly, its sound a stark contrast to the tension in the air. Holmes moved with the grace of a predator, his cane tapping lightly against the stone path as he followed the footprints. They stopped abruptly at the locked gate, its heavy padlock gleaming in the dim light. Holmes examined it closely, his fingers brushing over the metal. "No signs of tampering," he said. "The lock is intact, yet the footprints end here." "Curious." Watson frowned, glancing around. "Could she have climbed over?" Holmes shook his head. "Unlikely. The gate is high, and her dress would have caught on the ironwork. No, she had a key, or someone opened it for her." He straightened, his gaze drifting to a nearby rosebush, its branches heavy with blooms. Something caught his azure scrap of white fabric, snagged on a thorn. He plucked it free, holding it up for inspection. "Tulle," he said. "A fragment of a wedding veil, unless I am much mistaken." Watson's eyes widened. "Clara's veil." "Almost certainly," Holmes replied, folding the fabric carefully into his pocket. "The weave matches the description provided by Lord Edward. But observe the terret is clean, not frayed, as if caught in passing rather than torn in a struggle. She was moving quickly, but not fighting." Watson rubbed his chin. "So, she left of her own accord. But why, and where did she go?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he knelt again, his fingers sifting through the earth near the rosebush. After a moment, he unearthed a small, tarnished key, its surface etched with faint scratches. "Aha," he murmured, holding it aloft. "A key, hidden in haste. Not for the gate, I suspect it's too small, but for something else within the manor, perhaps." Watson stared at the key, its dull glint catching the lantern light. "A secret compartment, a locked room, possibly," Holmes said, rising to his feet. "The manor is old, filled with secrets built into its very walls. This key may unlock more than a door, it may unlock the truth Clara spoke of." He turned back toward the house, his silhouette sharp against the night. "Come, Watson, the garden has told us what it can. We must return to the hall and speak with those who saw Clara last." Back in the reception hall, The air felt heavier, as if the weight of Clara's absence pressed upon the room. Holmes moved to the head table, where Clara and Lord Edward had sat during the toasts. A servant, a nervous young woman named Emily, lingered nearby, twisting her apron in her hands. Holmes approached her, his expression softening just enough to put her at ease. "Emily," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "you were serving drinks during the reception. Did you see Lady Clara leave the hall?" Emily nodded, her eyes darting to the floor. "Yes, sir. She was at the table, laughing with Lord Edward, when she suddenly went pale. I thought she'd taken ill. She excused herself and walked toward the terrace doors. I didn't see her after." That Holmes tilted his head. Did she seem distressed? Or was there someone with her? "Not with her, sir," Emily said. "But I saw Miss Margaret Lord Edward's cousin follow her out a few moments later. I thought maybe she was checking on her." Holmes' eyes gleamed with interest. "Margaret Harrow. Interesting. And did Miss Margaret return?" Emily hesitated. I'm not sure, sir. The hall was so busy, with guests and all. I didn't notice her come back." Watson scribbled in his notebook, his brow furrowed. Margaret was jealous of Clara, wasn't she? I heard whispers among the guests. Could she have had something to do with this? Holmes raised a hand, silencing him. "Speculation, Watson, must wait for evidence. But Margaret's movements are worth noting." He turned back to Emily. "One more thing. Did you notice anyone else near the terrace doors, or anything unusual?" Emily bit her lip, then nodded. "There was a man, sir. Not a guest, I don't think. He was standing by the doors, watching Lady Clara. He had a dark coat and a hat pulled low. I only saw him for a moment before he slipped outside." Holmes' expression sharpened. "A man in a dark coat. Did you see his face?" "No, sir," Emily said, shaking her head. "It was too quick, but he seemed out of place, like he didn't belong." Holmes thanked her and dismissed her gently, his mind already racing. A stranger at the wedding, he mused, pacing the hall. Someone who did not belong, yet was close enough to watch Clara and Margaret trailing her cousin's bride. The plot thickens, Watson. The two men spent the next hour combing the hall for further clues. Holmes examined every table, every corner, his keen senses attuned to the smallest detail. He noted the placement of chairs, the scuff marks on the polished floor, the faint smudge of mud near the terrace doors that matched the garden footprints. Watson, meanwhile, interviewed other servants, piecing together a timeline of Clara's final moments in the hall. She had been radiant, they said, but nervous, her eyes darting to the ring on her finger, as if it weighed heavily on her mind. As the clock struck midnight, Holmes paused by the fireplace, where a low fire still burned. He crouched, sifting through the ashes with a poker. "Watson," he called, his voice tinged with excitement. "Come here." He pulled a partially burned scrap of paper from the embers, its edges charred but its writing still legible. The words were faint, written in a hurried hand. "Debt must be paid. The ring is the key." Watson peered over his shoulder. A debt, what could that mean? And why burn it? Holmes folded the paper carefully, tucking it into his pocket alongside the veil fragment and the key. Someone sought to destroy evidence, but their haste betrayed them. This letter, the key, the footprints, they are pieces of a puzzle. Clara's disappearance is no mere flight of fancy. She left with purpose, and someone or something drove her to it. Watson shivered, glancing at the darkened windows. You don't think the phantom bride? Holmes' lips twitched in a rare smile. Watson, you are incorrigible. The only phantoms here are those of human greed and deception. But fear not, we shall unmask them all in time. The night grew late, and the manors seemed to close in around them, its shadows deepening with every creak of the floorboards. Holmes and Watson returned to the terrace, standing once more by the rosebush where the veil had been found. The garden stretched out before them, a maze of secrets waiting to be unravelled. Holmes' eyes gleamed in the lantern light, his mind already piecing together the fragments of the mystery. The ring holds the truth, he murmured, almost to himself. And the truth, Watson, is out there, waiting for us to find it. The investigation continued into the early hours, with Holmes and Watson retracing their steps through the reception hall and garden, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Broken wine glass, with its faint scent of lavender, suggested a moment of tension, perhaps an argument or a sudden decision. Holmes hypothesized that Clara had dropped the glass in her haste to leave, her perfume lingering on the shards. The muddy footprints, so clearly defined, indicated she had not been carried or dragged, but had moved under her own power, her steps purposeful despite their speed. The locked gate posed a problem, but the discovery of the small key hinted at a deeper layer to the manor's secrets. Holmes' mind worked like a machine, cataloguing every observation. The veil fragment, torn but not frayed, suggested Clara had caught it on the rosebush as she passed, perhaps distracted or in a hurry. The key, buried hastily in the flower bed, was a deliberate act of concealment. Clara, or someone else, had not wanted it found immediately, and the burned letter, with its cryptic mention of a debt, pointed to a motive rooted in history, perhaps tied to the ring's storied past. Watson, ever the practical companion, focused on the human element. He questioned the servants further, learning that Clara had been seen speaking quietly with Lord Edward's cousin, Margaret, just before her disappearance. Margaret's demeanour had been cold, her eyes sharp with something akin to resentment. The servants also mentioned the strange man in the dark coat, though none could provide a clear description. He had appeared and vanished like a shadow, leaving only whispers in his wake. Holmes, meanwhile, examined the terrace doors themselves, noting their heavy construction and the lack of scratches or scuff marks that would indicate forced entry or exit. She left willingly, he concluded, his voice firm. But not alone. Someone was with her, or watching her, at the very least. The mention of Margaret intrigued Holmes. Her proximity to Clara at the critical moment, combined with the servants' gossip about her jealousy, made her a person of interest. Yet the stranger in the dark coat was equally compelling, a figure who did not belong, yet had been close enough to observe Clara's every move. Holmes suspected a connection between the two, though the nature of it remained elusive. As dawn approached, painting the sky with streaks of grey and gold, Holmes and Watson retreated to a small parlour, off the reception hall, where a fire was lit to ward off the morning chill. Holmes sat in an armchair, his fingers steepled, his eyes half closed as he entered what Watson called his mind palace. Watson watched in silence, knowing better than to interrupt. Holmes was sifting through the clues, arranging them like pieces on a chessboard, testing theories and discarding those that did not fit. The lavender, Holmes said suddenly, his eyes snapping open. It is not merely a clue, but a signature. Clara wore it, yes, but so might another. We must determine if Margaret favours the same scent, or if our mysterious stranger carried it. The glass, the footprints, the veil all point to a hurried exit but one planned in advance. The key suggests a destination within the manor, a place Clara intended to go, or to lead us to. Watson nodded, scribbling in his notebook. And the letter, the debt, a debt, Holmes said, is a powerful motivator. It could be financial, emotional, or even historical, a grudge carried through generations. The ring, with its emerald, and its curse, is at the heart of this. Clara's note said it holds the truth. We must find where that truth is hidden. The parlour door creaked open, and Lord Edward appeared, his face pale and drawn. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice trembling, "have you found anything? My Clara, is she safe?" Holmes rose, his expression unreadable. "We have made progress, Lord Edward. Your bride left this hall of her own volition, but not without reason. Tell me, did Clara ever speak of a debt, or of the ring's history?" Lord Edward hesitated, his eyes flickering with unease. She mentioned the ring's curse once or twice, said it made her uneasy, that it felt like a weight on her soul. I thought it nonsense, but she was insistent. She even asked about the manor's old library, said she wanted to read about its history. Holmes' eyes gleamed. "The library, of course." "Thank you, Lord Edward. Rest assured, we will find her." As Lord Edward withdrew, Holmes turned to Watson. "The library, Watson. That is where our key will lead us. Clara was searching for something, perhaps the truth she spoke of, and I suspect Margaret, or our shadowed stranger, knows more than they let on." The two men set off for the library, the manor's corridors silent, save for the echo of their footsteps. The mystery of Clara's disappearance was beginning to take shape, its threads weaving together like a tapestry. The phantom bride might haunt the rumours of Harrow Manor, but Holmes knew the truth lay not in spectres, but in the tangible clues left behind: footprints, a key, a torn veil, and a burned letter whispering of debts unpaid. The library loomed. Ahead, its heavy doors promising answers. Holmes gripped the small key in his pocket, his mind alight with possibilities. The scene of the vanishing had spoken, and now it was time to listen to the manor itself. Chapter 4. The Family's Secrets. The heavy oak door to the Harrow. Family's private quarters creaked as Sherlock Holmes pushed it open, his sharp eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor beyond. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood, an old money, a testament to the Harrow lineage that stretched back centuries. Dr. John Watson followed closely, his notebook tucked under one arm, his brow furrowed as he processed the mounting clues surrounding Lady Clara's disappearance. The opulent halls of Harrow Manor, adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, seemed to watch their every move, as if guarding secrets of their own. Holmes paused at the threshold, his gloved fingers brushing against the intricate carvings. On the doorframe, "This is where the truth begins to unravel." "Watson," he murmured, his voice low but laced with anticipation. The reception hall and gardens offered us the stage. Now we step behind the curtain. Watson nodded, though his mind lingered on the torn veil fragment they'd found in the garden, its delicate lace caught on a rose bush like a whispered confession. "Do you think Clara's still in the manor, Holmes, or has she truly vanished?" Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile. "Patience, my dear Watson. The manor has more to tell us, and its inhabitants even more so. Let us start with those closest to Lady Clara. Their first stop was the maid's quarters, a modest room tucked away at the end of the corridor. The maid, a young woman named Eliza, sat nervously on the edge of her narrow bed, her hands twisting in her apron. Her round face, framed by a white cap, was pale, and her eyes darted toward the door as if expecting an interruption. "Eliza," Holmes began, his tone measured but firm. "You were Lady Clara's personal maid. You saw her daily, attended to her needs. Tell me, did she seem distressed in the days leading up to the wedding?" Eliza hesitated, her fingers tightening on the fabric of her apron. She was nervous, sir. More than a bride ought to be, if I may say. She'd pace her room at night, muttering about that ring, the emerald one, the Harrow heirloom. Said it carried a weight, like it wasn't hers to wear. Holmes leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "A weight, you say? Did she elaborate?" "Not much, sir," Eliza replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Only that the ring had a history, something about a curse. I thought it was just wedding nerves, but then," she trailed off, glancing at Watson as if seeking reassurance. "Go on," Watson encouraged gently, his pen poised over his notebook. Eliza swallowed hard. 2 days before the wedding, she got a letter. She wouldn't let me see it, which was odd. She usually shared everything with me. She read it in her room, alone, and afterward she was different, quiet, like she was carrying a secret. She couldn't tell. Holmes' eyes narrowed. "This letter, did you see who delivered it? Or catch a glimpse of its contents?" Eliza shook her head. "No, sir. It came with the morning post, but there was no sender's name, just a plain envelope. She burned it in the fireplace that same night. I saw the ashes when I cleaned her." Holmes straightened, his mind already racing. "Burned, you say? And where is this fireplace?" "In her private sitting room, just down the hall," Eliza said, pointing toward a door at the far end of the corridor. "Excellent," Holmes said, his tone brisk. "You've been most helpful, Eliza. One final question. Did Lady Clara ever mention leaving the manor? Perhaps to visit someone or retrieve something?" Eliza's eyes widened. "No, sir. She loved Lord Edward, truly. She'd never leave him. Not willingly, but—" She hesitated again, then leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She did say once that if the ring's secret came out, it might ruin everything." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson, who scribbled furiously in his notebook. "Thank you, Eliza," Holmes said, turning toward the door. "We shall trouble you no further for now." As they stepped into the corridor, Watson whispered, "A secret letter, burned to ashes. That's no small thing, Holmes. And this talk of a cursed you think Clara believed it?" Holmes' expression was unreadable. "Belief is irrelevant, Watson. What matters is what Clara did with that belief. Come, let us inspect this fireplace." The sitting room was a cozy, feminine space, with rose-colored wallpaper and a small mahogany desk cluttered with writing paper and inkwells. A portrait of Lady Clara hung above the fireplace, her serene smile at odds with the turmoil Eliza had described. The fireplace itself was cold, its grate filled with a pile of fine ash. Holmes knelt before it, his magnifying glass glinting in the lamplight as he sifted through the debris. "Careless," he muttered, extracting a fragment of charred paper no larger than a postage stamp. He held it up, tilting it toward the light. The fragment bore a few legible words. "Debt must be paid. Ring." Watson peered over his shoulder. A debt? Could this be blackmail, Holmes? Someone threatening Clara over the ring? "Possibly," Holmes said, slipping the fragment into a small envelope. "Or a warning. The ring is clearly more than a baublitzer key to something larger. We must learn who else knew of its significance. Their next destination was the drawing room, where Lord Edward's cousin, Margaret Harrow, awaited. Margaret was a striking woman in her early 30s, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair swept into an elegant chignon. She sat by a window, her posture rigid, a cup of tea untouched on the table beside her. Her eyes, a cold shade of blue, flicked toward Holmes and Watson as they entered, but she offered no greeting. "Miss Harrow," Holmes began, settling into a chair opposite her, "you were present at the reception when Lady Clara disappeared. Where were you precisely when the guests noticed her absence?" Margaret's lips pursed. "I was in the ballroom, mingling with guests, as one does at such events. I hardly kept a diary of my movements." Holmes' smile was thin, of course. "Yet you must have noticed something, perhaps a guest acting strangely, or Clara herself behaving out of character." Margaret's gaze hardened. "Clara was always out of character, Mr. Holmes. A nervous little thing, always fidgeting with that ring. She didn't belong here, you know. Edward could have done better." Watson bristled at the venom in her tone, but Holmes remained impassive. "A strong opinion," he said. "Did you share it with Lord Edward?" Margaret's fingers tightened around her teacup. "I didn't need to. He saw it himself, her odd behavior, her obsession with that cursed ring. She was no Harrow, and yet," Holmes said, leaning forward, "she was to be Lady Harrow. Did that trouble you, Miss Harrow? The idea of an outsider claiming such a prominent place in the family?" Margaret's eyes flashed, but she quickly composed herself. "You're fishing, Mr. Holmes. I had no reason to wish Clara ill. I was in the ballroom when she vanished, as I said. Ask any guest." Holmes tilted his head, studying her. "And during the toasts, when the wine glass was broken, where were you then?" Margaret hesitated, just for a moment. "I stepped out to the terrace for some air. It was stifling in there." "Alone?" Holmes pressed. "Yes," she said quickly, then added, "No, I mean, I was with Lady Wentworth for a time. She can confirm it." Holmes nodded, though his eyes betrayed no satisfaction. "Thank you, Miss Harrow. We may speak again." As they left the drawing room, Watson whispered, "She's hiding something, Holmes. That pause, she's not telling the whole truth." "Indeed," Holmes said, his voice low. "Margaret Harrow is a woman of ambition, and ambition breeds secrets. Her dislike for Clara is palpable, but whether it extends to foul play remains to be seen." They continued their exploration of the private quarters, moving to Lord Edward's study, a masculine counterpart to Clara's sitting room. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and a large oak desk dominated the centre, its surface littered with papers and a half-empty decanter of brandy. Holmes' attention was drawn to a small wastebasket beside the desk, where a crumpled piece of paper caught his eye. He retrieved it, smoothing it out with care. The paper was a draft of a letter, written in a hurried hand. "The ring must be returned. The debt is too great." The signature was illegible, but the handwriting bore a faint resemblance to Margaret's precise script. Watson's eyes widened. Another letter. Could Margaret have written to Clara? Holmes shook his head. "The handwriting is similar, but not identical. It could be a forgery or someone mimicking her style. We need more evidence." As they searched the study, Watson noticed a locked drawer in the desk. "Holmes, look at this. It's bolted shut, unusual for a desk in one's own home." Holmes examined the lock, his fingers tracing its edges. A simple mechanism, but well hidden. Fortunately, he produced the small key they'd found in the flower bed. its brass surface glinting in the lamplight. With a soft click, the drawer opened, revealing a velvet-lined box. Inside was a single item, a gold locket, its surface engraved with a delicate, floral pattern. Holmes opened the locket, revealing a miniature portrait of Clara, her face serene but her eyes haunted. Beside it was a lock of dark hair, tied with a ribbon. Watson frowned. Clara's locket. Why lock it away? Holmes turned the locket over, noting a faint scratch on its back. This is no ordinary keepsake, Watson. The scratch suggests it was opened recently, perhaps forcibly, and the hair too dark to be Clara's. We must determine whose it is. As they left the study, the manor seemed to close in around them, its shadows deepening with the weight of its secrets. Holmes' mind was a whirlwind of connections. The burned letter, Margaret's evasions, the locket, and the ring's mysterious history. Clara's disappearance was no simple flight of fancy, it was tied to a web of family tensions, hidden debts, and a past that refused to stay buried. Watson, Holmes said, as they descended the grand staircase, we have uncovered fragments of a larger truth. The ring is the key, but the family is the lock. Margaret's jealousy, Eliza's observations, and this locket, they all point to a motive rooted in the Harrow legacy. We must dig deeper. Watson nodded, his resolve strengthening. Where to next, Holmes? To the library, Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming. The journal we found mentioned a hidden compartment. If Clara was researching the ring's history, she may have left us another clue. As they moved toward the library, the distant sound of a clock chiming midnight echoed through the manor, a reminder that time was slipping away. Clara was out there, somewhere, and the truth about the phantom bride's lost ring was closer than ever, but so too was the danger. The library was a cavernous room, its shelves towering to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and age. A single candelabrum cast flickering shadows across the walls, giving the impression of movement where there was none. Holmes moved with purpose, his fingers trailing along the spines of books until he reached a section marked Harrow Family Records. He pulled down the dusty journal they'd found earlier, its pages brittle but intact. The entries, written in a spidery hand, detailed the ring's origins, a gift from a foreign dignitary in the 1700s, bestowed upon the Harrow family, but rumoured to have been claimed under dubious circumstances. One passage stood out. The ring holds a secret, locked within its band. Only the worthy may find it. Holmes' eyes narrowed. A secret within the ring itself. Watson, we must examine the ring more closely if we can find it. Watson frowned. But the ring is missing, isn't it? Clara took it with her. Perhaps, Holmes said, his tone enigmatic. Or perhaps it was never with her at all. The duplicate ring mentioned in the legend, could it be a decoy? We need to speak to Lord Edward again. He may know more than he's let on. They found Lord Edward in the conservatory, staring out at the darkened gardens. His face was haggard, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. Mr. Holmes, he said, his voice heavy, have you found her? Is Clara safe? We are making progress, Holmes said carefully. But I must ask you about the ring. Did Clara ever show you anything unusual about it? A hidden mechanism, perhaps? Edward's brow furrowed. She mentioned once that it felt heavier than it should, as if something was inside it. I thought it was just her imagination. The ring has been in my family for generations. It's priceless, but I never thought it held secrets. Holmes nodded, filing the information away. And your cousin, Margaret, how close was she to Clara? Edward hesitated. Margaret was protective of the family name. She didn't approve of Clara at first, but I thought they'd come to an understanding. Why do you ask? A mere formality, Holmes said smoothly, though his mind was racing. Margaret's jealousy, the burned letter, the locket, and now the ring's potential secret all were pieces of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. As they left the conservatory, Watson whispered, Holmes, do you think Edward's hiding something too? Everyone in this manor is hiding something, Holmes replied. The question is, whose secret drove Clara to vanish? The night stretched on, and the manor seemed to pulse with unspoken truths. Holmes and Watson returned to the library, where Holmes began a meticulous search for the hidden compartment mentioned in the journal. He tapped along the walls, listening for hollow spaces, his mind a whirlwind of deductions. After nearly an hour, he paused at a carved wooden panel behind a bookshelf. A faint seam suggested a hidden door. He pressed the panel, and with a soft click, it swung open, revealing a narrow recess. Inside was a small leather pouch, its contents rattling softly. Holmes opened the pouch, revealing a collection of old keys, each marked with a tiny engraved symbol. One key matched the crest they'd seen in the Junola crest, not belonging to the Harrows, but to another family. The Langleys, Holmes murmured, holding the key up to the light. This is no coincidence, Watson. The ring, the letter, the locket, they all point to a feud older than Clara herself. Watson's eyes widened. You think Clara discovered this feud, and that's why she fled? I think, Holmes said, his voice low, that Clara was trying to right a wrong. But someone, perhaps Margaret, perhaps another, wanted that wrong to stay buried. As they prepared to leave the library, a faint noise echoed from the corridor's soft, deliberate footstep. Holmes held up a hand, signaling silence. He moved to the door, peering into the darkened hallway, but no one was there. Yet the air felt heavier, as if the manor itself was watching, waiting for the next move in this deadly game of secrets. Tomorrow, Holmes said, his voice resolute, we pursue the Langley connection. But tonight, Watson, we must be vigilant. The truth is close-in, so is the danger. They retired to their guest rooms, but sleep was elusive. Watson lay awake, his mind replaying the day's discoveries, the burned letter, Margaret's evasions, the locket, and the keys. Holmes, in the next room, sat by the window, his pipe glowing faintly in the dark. His thoughts a labyrinth of possibilities. The Harrow family secrets were unraveling, but the heart of the mystery, Clara's whereabouts and the ring's true significance, remained just out of reach. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Holmes knew one thing for certain. The phantom bride was no ghost, but a shadow cast by the living, and he would drag that shadow into the light. Chapter 5. The Mind Palace Deduction. The rain had begun to fall in earnest as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson returned to Harrow Manor from their initial inspection of the grounds. The grand estate loomed against the grey London sky, its turrets and gables cutting sharp silhouettes through the mist. Inside, the warmth of the manor's temporary studio, small, book-lined room Lord Edward had offered for their use, provided a stark contrast to the chill outside. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls, where portraits of stern-faced Harrow ancestors stared down with unyielding gazes. Holmes settled into a backed chair, his lean frame sinking into the worn leather, as he steepled his fingers beneath his chin. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to focus on some distant point beyond the room's confines. Watson, ever the faithful observer, took a seat opposite, his notebook open on his lap, pen poised, to capture the deductions that would inevitably spill from his friend's mind. The air was thick with the scent of old books and the faint taint of smoke, but Holmes appeared oblivious to it all, his mind already retreating into the labyrinthine depths of his fabled mind palace. "Watson," Holmes began, his voice low and deliberate, "we are dealing with a puzzle of considerable intricacy. The disappearance of Lady Clara, the missing ring, the cryptic note, the legend of the phantom bride, these are not disparate threads, but parts of a single tapestry. We must weave them together to reveal the pattern." Watson nodded, his pen scratching faintly against the paper. "The note is our strongest lead, Holmes. The ring holds the truth. It's in Clara's hand, no doubt about it. But what truth? And why flee during her own wedding reception?" Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile, though his eyes remained distant. "Precisely, Watson. The note is not a plea for help, but a statement of intent. Clara is no victim she left of her own volition. The muddy footprints, the torn veil, the small key hidden in the flower bedel point to a deliberate exit, not a kidnapping. But the question remains, why?" Watson leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "The ring, perhaps. It's valuable, an heirloom. Could she have taken it too? Sell it, or to protect it?" Holmes shook his head, his fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. "No, Watson. If Clara intended to sell the ring, she would not have left a note drawing attention to it. The ring's significance is not monetary but symbolic. Its history, as Lord Edward hinted, is tied to a family cursed detail we must explore further. For now, let us consider the evidence systematically." He closed his eyes, and Watson knew better than to interrupt. This was the moment when Holmes's mind palace came a liver mental construct where every fact, every observation, was catalogued and cross-referenced with ruthless precision. Watson had seen it before, the way Holmes could retreat into his own mind, sifting through a lifetime of knowledge to unearth connections invisible to others. The room seemed to grow quieter, the crackle of the fire and the patter of rain fading as Holmes's focus deepened in his mind palace. Holmes stood at the center of a vast imagined library, its shelves stretching endlessly into the darkness. Each shelf held a fragment of the case, the cryptic note written in Clara's elegant script, the muddy footprints, uneven and suggesting haste, the torn veil caught on a rosebush thorn, the small key, its brass surface tarnished but functional. He moved through the library, pulling down volumes of memory details from the reception hall, the scent of lavender, the broken wine glass, the journal in the library mentioning the ring's origins. Each fact was a puzzle piece, and Holmes's task was to fit them together. "The note," he began, "was the cornerstone. The ring holds the truth, not a literal truth, perhaps, but a metaphorical one. The ring was an heirloom, passed down through generations of Harrows, its emerald glinting with secrets. Lord Edward had mentioned Clara's unease about its history, tied to a curse. The dusty journal in the manor's library had hinted at a hidden compartment, a place where the ring's origins might be documented. Holmes's mind lingered on this, the journal's faded pages flashing before him. The ring was not just a jewel, but a key to a family's past Clara might have uncovered. He turned to the footprints. They led from the reception hall to the garden's locked gate, suggesting Clara had a means of exit. The gate was locked, yet the key found in the flower bed was small. not suited for a gate, but for something more delicate: a box, a drawer, a hidden lock. Holmes's thoughts raced to the journal's mention of a compartment. Could the key unlock a secret within the manor itself? And if so, why had Clara hidden it in the flower bed? Was she protecting it from someone at the reception? The veil, torn and caught on a rose bush, suggested a struggle or perhaps a deliberate act to leave a clue. Clara had worn the veil during the reception, its lace delicate and unmistakable. The tear was clean, as if snagged in haste, but the placement in the rosebush was too convenient. Holmes suspected Clara had left it intentionally, a breadcrumb, for someone to follow, but who? Not Lord Edward, who seemed genuinely distraught. Perhaps someone else at the manor, someone who knew the ring's true value. Holmes's mind shifted to the reception hall. The broken wine glass, its shards scattered near a side table, had caught his eye. The glass was not dropped accidentally. Its base was intact, suggesting it had been struck against something hard. A signal, perhaps, a distraction. The faint scent of lavender lingered nearby, a perfume Clara was known to wear. Had she broken the glass to draw attention, to create a moment of chaos that allowed her to slip away? The legend of the Phantom Bride, though dismissed by Holmes as superstitious nonsense, could not be ignored entirely. The servants' tales of a ghostly figure in a wedding veil had surfaced conveniently after Clara's disappearance. Was it a coincidence, or had someone seeded the story to obscure the truth? The journal's mention of a bride's tragic death a century ago added weight to the legend, but Holmes suspected it was a distraction, a way to muddy the waters. He opened his eyes, the study snapping back into focus. Watson was watching him, his pen still poised. "Well, Holmes," he prompted, "what have you deduced?" Holmes leaned forward, his voice brisk. "Clara's disappearance is no abduction, Watson. She fled deliberately, driven by a secret tied to the ring. The note, 'The ring holds the truth,' suggests she discovered something about its history, something worth risking her reputation to pursue. The key we found in the flower bed is not for the garden gate, but for a hidden lock within the manor, likely the compartment mentioned in the journal. Clara hid it to ensure it was found by someone. She trusted her to keep it from someone she feared." Watson's eyes widened. But who? Lord Edward? He seemed genuinely shaken. "Lord Edward is a possibility," Holmes admitted, "but his distress appears authentic. No, Watson, we must look to the family." Margaret, his cousin, was evasive. About her whereabouts during the reception. The maid mentioned Clara receiving a letter from an unknown sender, and we found a partially burned letter in the fireplace. Chapter 6. A journey to Clara's past. The train rattled through the verdant countryside of Kent, its rhythmic clatter a counterpoint to the frenetic thoughts swirling in Sherlock Holmes' mind. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills outside, shrouding the landscape in a silvery haze that mirrored the elusive nature of the case at hand. Seated opposite him in the first-class compartment, Dr. John Watson scribbled in his notebook, his brow furrowed as he attempted to catalogue the myriad clues they had uncovered at Harrow Manor. The cryptic note, the muddy footprints, the torn veil, the small key-itch fragment of evidence seemed to beckon them toward a deeper truth, one that Holmes was determined to unearth. Holmes leaned back in his seat, his sharp eyes fixed on the window, though he saw not the passing fields, but the intricate web of deductions forming in his mind. The disappearance of Lady Clara Harrow, the missing emerald-encrusted ring, and the spectral tales of a phantom bride had woven a tapestry of mystery that demanded his full attention. The journey to Kent to the village of Ashford, where Clara had spent her childhood, was not a whim but a calculated step. Holmes suspected that the key to Clara's vanishing lay not only in the ring's history but in her own past, a past she had guarded with unusual secrecy. "Watson," Holmes said, abruptly breaking the silence, "what do you make of Clara's reticence regarding her family?" Lord Edward mentioned she rarely spoke of her upbringing, yet her maid hinted at a preoccupation with the Harrow ring's origins. Why would a bride, on the eve of her wedding, delve into such matters? Watson looked up from his notebook, his pen pausing mid-sentence. Perhaps she sensed something amiss about the ring. You saw how nervous Lord Edward said she was. If she was researching its history, she might have uncovered something that troubled her, something that prompted her to flee. Holmes nodded, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Precisely. The note, "The ring holds the truth," suggests she believed the ring was more than a mere heirloom, its history, tied to the Harrow family curse and the phantom bride legend, may hold the key to her actions. Our task in Ashford is to uncover what she learned and why it drove her to such extremes. The train slowed as it approached Ashford station, the platform bustling with villagers in their Sunday best, their chatter mingling with the hiss of steam. Holmes and Watson disembarked, their boots crunching on the gravel as they made their way into the village. Ashford was a quaint, picturesque place, its cobblestone streets lined with ivy-clad cottages and a small church whose steeple pierced the morning mist. The air carried the scent of freshly baked bread and blooming roses, a stark contrast to the smog of London. Their first stop was the home of Miss Eleanor Price, Clara's childhood friend, whose name had surfaced during Holmes' inquiries at Harrow Manor. Eleanor lived in a modest cottage on the outskirts of the village, its garden overgrown with wildflowers. As they approached, a young woman with auburn hair and a cautious smile emerged from the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and apprehension. "I received your telegram. You're here about Clara, aren't you?" "Indeed, Miss Price," Holmes replied, his tone courteous but direct. "We are investigating Lady Clara's disappearance, and we believe you may have insights into her state of mind before her wedding. May we come in?" Eleanor nodded, leading them into a cozy parlor adorned with faded lace curtains and a crackling fire. She offered them tea, which Watson accepted gratefully, though Holmes declined, his attention fixed on their hostess. Eleanor's eyes darted nervously as she sat, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. "Clara and I were close as children," Eleanor began, her voice soft. "We grew up exploring these fields, dreaming of grand adventures. But she changed after her engagement to Lord Edward. She became secretive. She wrote to me often, but her letters were vague, almost guarded." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Did she mention the Harrow family ring in her letters, or anything about its history?" Eleanor hesitated, then rose to retrieve a small bundle of letters from a drawer. "She did, actually. About a month ago, she wrote that she was researching the ring's origins. She said it was tied to a scandal in the Harrow family, something about a theft from another family long ago. She seemed obsessed. I thought it was just wedding nerves, but now I'm not so sure." She handed Holmes a letter, its edges worn from frequent handling. Holmes unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning Clara's elegant script. The letter read, "Dearest Eleanor, the ring is more than it seems. I've been reading about the Harrows' history, and I fear the ring was never rightfully theirs. There's a story of a feud, a theft, and a curse that lingers. I must know the truth before I wear it as Lady Harrow. Do you remember old Mr. Grayson, the jeweller in Ashford? I've written to him for help. Yours, Clara Holmes, passed the letter to Watson, who read it with growing interest. Mr. Grayson, you say? Holmes asked. Is he still in Ashford? Eleanor nodded. He's retired now, but he still lives above his old shop on High Street. He's known Clara since she was a girl. If anyone knows about the ring, it's him. Thanking Eleanor, Holmes and Watson made their way to High Street, where Grayson's jewellery shop stood, its sign faded but still legible. The shop was closed, but a knock on the door brought an elderly man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a shock of white hair. Mr. Grayson greeted them warmly, though his expression grew solemn when they mentioned Clara. Poor lass, he said, ushering them into a cluttered back room filled with tools and gemstones. I heard she vanished. I warned her about that ring, you know. She came to me weeks ago, asking questions about its history. What did you tell her? Holmes asked, his voice low but insistent. Grayson sighed, settling into a creaky chair. The Harrow ring is no ordinary heirloom. It's an emerald set in gold, with an engraving inside the band a crest that doesn't belong to the Harrows. I recognized it from my studies. It's the crest of the Langley family, a noble line that fell into ruin in the 1700s. There was a scandal, you see. The Harrows were said to have swindled the ring from the Langleys during a bitter feud. Clara was shocked when I told her. She said she needed proof, something to confirm the story. Holmes' eyes gleamed with interest. Did she find such proof? Grayson shook his head. Not from me, but I gave her a sketch of the ring's engraving to help her search. She was determined to dig deeper, said it was a matter of honor. I told her to be careful. Family secrets like that can stir up trouble. He rummaged through a drawer and produced a yellowed piece of paper, handing it to Holmes. The sketch depicted the ring's inner band, where a delicate crest was etched, a lion rampant beneath a crescent moon, unmistakably distinct from the Harrow family's heraldry. Watson peered over Holmes' shoulder, his brow furrowing. The Langley's, Watson murmured. If Clara believed the ring was stolen, she might have felt compelled to return a tour, at least confront the Harrows about it. Indeed, Holmes said, folding the sketch carefully, this crest is a vital clue. It suggests Clara's disappearance was not a whim but a deliberate act, perhaps to protect the ring or expose its true origins. We must return to London and pursue this Langley connection further. As they left Grayson's shop, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village. The journey back to the station was silent, each man lost in thought. Holmes' mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. Clara's letter, the sketch, and the Langley crest pointed to a deeper motive, one that might explain not only her disappearance, but also the cryptic note and the muddy footprints leading to the locked gate. On the train back to London, Watson broke the silence. Holmes, do you think Clara fled to find the Langleys? To return the ring, perhaps? Holmes gazed out at the darkening countryside, his expression unreadable. Possibly, Watson. But there's more to this than a simple act of restitution. The note the ring holds the truth, implies a secret worth risking her safety for. The key we found in the flower bed may unlock more than a physical compartment. It may unlock the truth Clara sought. Watson nodded, though his face betrayed his uncertainty. And the phantom bride, could it be tied to this Langley feud? Holmes' lips curved into a faint smile. The phantom bride is a distraction, Watson, a tale spun to obscure the truth. But every legend has a kernel of reality. The ring's history, and Clara's pursuit of it, is that kernel. We must find the Langley heir and determine what Clara discovered and what she feared. The train's whistle pierced the night as they neared London, the city's lights flickering like stars against the dark. Holmes felt the weight of the sketch in his pocket, its lines etching a path toward the next phase of their investigation. Clara was out there, alive or in peril, and the ring's secret was the key to finding her. As the train pulled into Victoria Station, Holmes resolved to follow the trail to its end. No matter how tangled the web of deceit and history might be, back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the sketch on his desk, its details illuminated by the glow of a gas lamp. He traced the crest with a finger, his mind racing through possibilities. The Langley family, the feud, the stolen ring all pointed to a motive that Clara had uncovered, a motive that had driven her to abandon her wedding and vanish into the night. The small key, still tucked in his waistcoat, seemed to pulse with promise, a tangible link to the manor's secrets. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice sharp with purpose, "tomorrow we return to Harrow Manor. The key we found must fit a lock somewhere in that Hauser compartment. A safe, perhaps even a hidden room, and we must locate the Langley heir. If Clara sought them out, they may hold the final piece of this puzzle." Watson nodded, his exhaustion giving way to determination. And if Clara's still alive, Holmes, what then? Holmes' eyes glinted in the lamplight. "If she's alive, Watson, we'll find her. And if she's not, we'll ensure the truth. She sought is brought to light. The ring holds the truth, and I intend to uncover it." As the night deepened, Holmes sat by the fire, his violin resting on his knee, though he did not play. His mind was a symphony of deductions, each note a clue, each chord a connection. Clara's past, the Langley feud, and the ring's hidden history were converging, and Holmes knew the next day would bring them closer to the heart of the mystery, or to a confrontation with those who wished it to remain buried. The journey to Kent had been but a step, yet it had illuminated a path forward. The Langley crest, the jeweller's tale, and Clara's determination formed a constellation of clues, guiding Holmes toward the truth. As the fire crackled and the city slept, he felt the familiar thrill of the chase, the certainty that the enigma of the phantom bride's lost ring was within his grasp. Tomorrow the hunt would continue, and Sherlock Holmes would not rest until the shadows of Harrow Manor yielded their secrets. Chapter 7. The hidden compartment, the train from Kent, rattled back toward London, its rhythmic clatter a steady counterpoint to the whirlwind of thoughts in Sherlock Holmes' mind. The journey had been fruitful, yielding the critical clue of the rings engraving a crest not belonging to the Harrows, but to the long-aggrieved Langley family. Holmes sat by the window, his sharp eyes fixed on the passing countryside, though his mind was elsewhere, piecing together the puzzle of Lady Clara's disappearance and the elusive emerald-encrusted ring. Dr. John Watson, seated opposite, scribbled notes in his journal, occasionally glancing at his friend, whose silence was as telling as any deduction. "Holmes," Watson ventured, breaking the quiet, "do you suppose Clara is still in London, if she's investigating the ring's origins? As her friend suggested, she might have gone to ground somewhere nearby." Holmes' lips twitched into a faint smile. "An astute observation, Watson, but incomplete. Clara's actions suggest purpose, not panic. The key we found in the flower bed at Harrow Manor is no mere trinket, it's the linchpin of this affair. I suspect it unlocks more than a physical barrier. It's time we returned to the manor and tested its fit. The train pulled into Victoria Station, and the two men navigated the bustling platform, their steps purposeful as they hailed a hansom cab to Harrow Manor. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city, and the air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and horse manure. Holmes leaned back in the cab, his fingers steepled, lost in thought. Watson, accustomed to these moments of intense concentration, remained silent, though his mind churned with questions about the ring, the Langley crest, and the cryptic note. Clara had left behind, "The ring holds the truth." Harrow Manor loomed ahead, its Gothic spires piercing the grey sky. The estate, with its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows, seemed to guard its secrets as fiercely as ever. Lord Edward. Harrow greeted them at the entrance, his face pale and drawn, the strain of his bride's absence etched into every line. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice tight. "Have you found anything? Any sign of Clara?" Holmes inclined his head. "We are making progress, Lord Harrow, but I require access to your library once more. There are matters yet to be uncovered." "Of course," Lord Edward replied, leading them through the grand foyer, where the echoes of the wedding reception still seemed to linger. The library, with its towering bookshelves and heavy oak furniture, was as they had left it, though the air felt heavier now, as if the weight of the manor's history pressed down upon them. Holmes wasted no time. He moved to the far wall, where a massive portrait of a Harrow ancestor hung, its stern eyes seeming to follow their every move. "Watson, the journal we found mentioned a hidden compartment in this room, did it not?" Watson nodded, flipping open his notebook. "Yes, it spoke of a secret heart in the library, tied to the ring's origins. I assumed it was metaphorical, but never assume, Watson." Holmes interrupted, his tone sharp but not unkind. "Metaphors are the refuge of poets, not conspirators. Clara's note and the key suggest a literal hiding place. Now, let us see what this room conceals." He ran his fingers along the edge of the portrait's frame, his touch precise and methodical. A faint click sounded, and Watson started as the portrait swung outward, revealing a recessed panel in the wall. Holmes produced the small key from his pocket, its brass surface glinting in the lamplight. He inserted it into a barely visible lock, and with a soft grinding of gears, the panel slid open, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside lay a leather-bound portfolio, its edges worn with age. Holmes carefully extracted it, laying it on a nearby table. Lord Edward hovered nearby, his breath catching as Holmes untied the portfolio's straps and opened it. Within were documents, letters, deeds, and a series of hand-drawn maps, all yellowed and brittle. At the top was a single sheet, written in a flowing script, detailing the history of the emerald ring. Holmes read aloud, his voice steady but laced with intensity. "The ring, crafted in 1743 for the Langley family, was a symbol of their prominence in Kent. Its emerald, sourced from a distant colony, was said to embody their legacy. In 1765, during a bitter feud, the ring was taken by Sir Reginald Harrow, under dubious circumstances, claimed as a spoil of a gambling debt. The Langleys swore to reclaim it, but the Harrows buried the truth, locking away evidence of their theft." Watson's eyes widened. So the ring was stolen. Clara must have discovered this and sought to right the wrong. Holmes nodded, his gaze fixed on the documents. "Precisely, these papers confirmed the Langley crest we found in Kent Clara's. Research led her to the truth, and I suspect she fled the manor to protect the ring or to confront someone connected to the Langleys. Lord Edward's face darkened. But why not tell me? Why run off in secret? Fear, perhaps, Holmes replied, or a belief that the truth would endanger you. The note she left the ring holds the truth, suggests she intended to act alone. But there's more here. He lifted another document, a letter addressed to a Langley descendant, dated only a month prior. It was written in Clara's hand, requesting a meeting to discuss a matter of mutual heritage. Watson frowned. She was corresponding with the Langleys. That's bold, given the bad blood between the families. Bold, yes, but also calculated, Holmes said. Clara is no damsel in distress. She's orchestrating something, and this letter gives us a destination. He pointed to the letter's footer, where an address in London was scrawled, 12 Grimshaw Lane, Whitechapel. Then Tan saw Lord Edward paced nervously. Whitechapel. That's a rough part of town, Holmes. Could Clara really be there? Holmes' eyes gleamed with purpose. If Clara is pursuing the ring's truth, she may well have gone to the Langleys. We must follow her trail. Watson, prepare yourself. We depart for Grimshaw Lane at once. The cab ride to Whitechapel was a stark contrast to the opulence of Harrow Manor. The streets grew narrower, the air thick with the stench of refuse and industry. Grimshaw Lane was a grim, cobbled alley, lined with crumbling tenements. Number 12 was a modest house, its windows dark, its door weathered but sturdy. Holmes knocked sharply, and after a moment, the door creaked open to reveal a man in his 40s, his face gaunt and his eyes wary. Thomas Langley, the last of the Langley line. Mr. Langley, Holmes said, his tone commanding yet courteous. I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We seek Lady Clara Harrow and a ring that rightfully belongs to your family. Thomas Langley's expression hardened. I don't know any Clara Harrow, and I've no ring to speak of. You're wasting your time. Holmes' gaze didn't waver. I have evidence suggesting otherwise. A letter from Lady Clara, requesting a meeting. Denying her presence only complicates matters. Langley hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing them entry. The interior was sparse, with faded wallpaper and a single flickering lamp. On a table lay a ring, its band identical to the Harrow heirloom but lacking the emerald. Holmes picked it up, examining it closely. A forgery, he murmured. Well crafted, but the crest is unmistakable. Where is the original? Langley's jaw tightened. I told Clara to keep it away from here. It's caused nothing but trouble. I sent her a letter, yes, demanding its return, but I didn't take. Her, she left of her own accord. Watson stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Mr. Langley, if Clara is in danger, you must tell us what you know. Langley sighed, sinking into a chair. She came to me a week ago, frantic, saying, the ring proved the Harrows stole it from us. She wanted to return it, to end the feud, but I told her to hide. Someone else is after it, someone dangerous. I don't know who. Holmes' mind raced. The duplicate ring suggested a deeper deception, and Clara's absence pointed to a calculated move. Did she mention anyone else? A friend, a confidant? Langley shook his head. She said she'd handle it alone, but she left this piece, slid a small, folded paper across the table, a map, crudely drawn, marking an abandoned chapel outside London. She said if I needed to find her, start there. Holmes pocketed the map, his mind already turning to the next step. Juno, they were in the midst of a tangled web, and Clara's whereabouts were only one thread. The chapel, the duplicate. Ring, the Langley feudal, pointed to a conspiracy larger than a simple theft. As they left Grimshaw Lane, Holmes felt the weight of the case pressing harder. Clara was alive, hiding, and the ring held secrets that someone was desperate to keep buried. The cab back to Harrow Manor was silent, both men lost in thought. Holmes clutched the map, his fingers tracing the lines of the chapel's location. "Watson," he said at last, "we're close. The chapel is our next move. Clara's waiting, and I intend to find her." They arrived at the manor late that night, the moon casting eerie shadows across the grounds. Holmes wasted no time, retiring to the library to study the documents further. A single sheet caught his age list of names, dated decades ago, including a Harrow and a Langley, with a note about a meeting at the chapel. "A rendezvous point," Holmes said softly. "Clara's not running blindly, she's following a trail." Watson sat nearby, his face etched with concern. "Holmes, if she's at the chapel, she's in danger. We must go now." "Tomorrow," Holmes replied, his voice calm but resolute. "We need rest and a plan. The chapel is no place for a midnight chase." The night passed in restless anticipation, and at dawn they set out for the chapel, armed with the map and the weight of the truth. Chapter 8. The Langley Connection. The fog clung to the streets of London like a shroud, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of street vendors as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson made their way to the run-down residence of Mr. Thomas Langley. The address gleaned from the dusty documents in Harrow Manor's hidden compartment led them to a narrow street in Whitechapel, where the houses leaned together as if sharing secrets. The Langley residence, once grand, now stood in disrepair, its windows boarded, its facade stained by years of neglect. Holmes, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings, noted the faint glow of a single lamp burning within. "This place reeks of desperation," Watson remarked, adjusting his coat against the damp chill. "Hardly the abode of a man claiming a family heirloom." "Desperation breeds motive, Watson," Holmes replied, his voice low. "The ring's history has stirred something in Mr. Langley. Let us see what truths he hides." They approached the door, its paint peeling like dead skin. Holmes rapped sharply, the sound echoing in the quiet street. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a gaunt man in his 50s, his eyes sunken and his hair thinning to wisps. His clothes, though once fine, were threadbare, and his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the doorframe. "Mr. Thomas Langley?" Holmes inquired, his tone polite but firm. "Who's asking?" Langley's voice was sharp, defensive, his gaze darting between Holmes and Watson. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my associate, Dr. Watson. We are here regarding the Harrow family ring and the disappearance of Lady Clara Harrow." Langley's face tightened, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I've nothing to say about that. You've wasted your trip." He began to close the door, but Holmes' cane swiftly blocked it. "A moment, Mr. Langley," Holmes said, his voice now edged with steel. "We have evidence suggesting you corresponded with Lady Clara before her disappearance. Denying it will only complicate matters." Langley hesitated, his eyes flickering with something between fear and defiance. After a long pause, he stepped back, allowing them entry. "Fine. Come in, but don't expect tea and biscuits." The interior of the house was as dismal as its exterior. Dust coated the furniture, and the air smelled of mildew and old tobacco. Langley led them to a cramped parlour, where a single chair faced a cracked mirror. He gestured for them to sit on a sagging sofa, but Holmes remained standing, his eyes scanning the room. Watson noted the clutter piles of yellowed papers, a broken clock, and a small portrait of a stern-faced woman, likely a Langley ancestor. "What do you know of Lady Clara's disappearance?" Holmes began, his gaze fixed on Langley. "Nothing." Langley snapped. "I heard she vanished, that's all. The Harrows have always been trouble, and that ring's no exception." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "You admit to knowledge of the ring, then? Interesting. We found a letter, partially burned in Harrow Manor, mentioning a debt tied to the ring. It was addressed to Lady Clara, and your name was mentioned." Langley's face paled, but he quickly recovered, crossing his arms. "You're fishing, Mr. Holmes. I wrote to Clara, yes, demanding the ring's return. It's ours stolen by the Harrows centuries ago, but I didn't make her disappear. I haven't seen her since she married that pompous lord." Holmes stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "The ring's history is tied to a feud between your family and the Harrows. Documents in Harrow Manor confirm the Langleys' claim. Why demand it now, after all these years?" Langley's jaw clenched. "Because it's my right. My family's been ruined, living in this." He gestured at the decaying room, while the Harrows flaunt their stolen wealth. "That ring's worth a fortune, and it's mine." Watson leaned forward, his voice calm but probing. "Did you threaten Lady Clara, Mr. Langley? Her maid mentioned she was distressed after receiving your letter." "I didn't threaten her." Langley's voice rose, his hands balling into fists. "I told her the truth, that the ring was stolen, that it belongs to us. She was curious, kept asking questions. I thought she'd help, but then she vanished." Holmes paced slowly, his fingers steepled. "Curious, you say? What questions?" "Did she ask?" Langley hesitated, his eyes darting to the floor. "About the ring's engraving. She thought it proved some scandal. I told her it was none of her business." Holmes stopped pacing, his gaze piercing. "And yet, you have something to show for it, don't you? A duplicate ring, perhaps?" Langley froze, his breath catching. Before he could respond, Holmes moved swiftly to a small table in the corner, where a velvet box lay half hidden under a pile of papers. He opened it, revealing a ring that mirrored the Harrow heirloom save for the absence of the emerald. The same intricate crest was engraved on its band. "Care to explain this, Mr. Langley?" Holmes held the ring aloft, its metal glinting in the dim light. Langley lunged forward, snatching for the ring, but Holmes stepped back, deftly avoiding him. Watson rose, his hand on his revolver, ready to intervene. "Easy, man," Watson warned. "It's not what you think." Langley shouted, his face flushed. "I had it made to prove a point, to show the Harrows we know their secret. It's not the real one." Holmes examined the ring closely, his lips curving into a faint smile. "A convincing replica, but flawed. The crest is slightly off, the gold to new. You meant to intimidate Clara, didn't you? To pressure her into surrendering the original." Langley slumped into his chair, defeated. "I just wanted what's mine. I didn't hurt her, I swear." Holmes handed the ring to Watson, who inspected it with a frown. "Then why the secrecy?" Watson asked. "If you're innocent, why hide this?" "Because no one believes a Langley anymore," Langley muttered. "The Harrows have money, power. I'm nothing but a name in a rotting house." Holmes' eyes softened, but only for a moment. "Your motives are clear, Mr. Langley. but your actions raise questions. If you did not orchestrate Lady Clara's disappearance, who did? And where is the real ring? Langley shook his head. I don't know. I haven't seen Clara since she wrote back, saying she'd look into the ring's history. That was weeks ago. Holmes pocketed the duplicate ring, his mind already racing ahead. Very well. We shall take our leave, but I advise you to remain here, Mr. Langley. Scotland Yard may have questions. As they stepped back into the foggy street, Watson glanced at Holmes. Do you believe him? Partially, Holmes replied, his voice thoughtful. He's bitter, desperate, but not a mastermind. The duplicate ring suggests he's a pawn in a larger game. Someone else is pulling the strings. Watson nodded, his mind turning to the clues they'd gathered. The coded message. From the séance, could it lead us to the next piece of this puzzle? Indeed, Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. The chapel it points to is our next destination. But first, we must verify something. Clara's questions about the ring's engraving suggest she uncovered a secret, perhaps one worth hiding for. They hailed a hansom cab, the drivers, whip cracking as they sped toward Baker Street. In the dim light of the cab, Holmes pulled out the duplicate ring, turning it over in his hands. This crest, he murmured, is not just a Langley mark. It's a key to something older, deeper. Clara knew it, and someone wanted her silenced. The cab rattled on, carrying them toward the next thread in the tangled web of the phantom. Bride's mystery. The chapel awaited, and with it, perhaps, the truth about Clara's disappearance and the ring's true owner. The journey to Baker Street was swift, the fog parting just enough to reveal the familiar outline of their lodgings. Inside, Holmes lit a lamp and spread out the documents they'd collected, the Langley papers, the sketch of the ring's crest, and the coded message from the séance. Watson watched as Holmes' fingers traced the lines of the crest, his brow furrowed in concentration. This crest, Holmes said, is not merely decorative. It's a cipher, a heraldic code used by families to conceal secrets. The Langleys and Harrows both claim it, but its origins lie elsewhere. Clara's research in Kent pointed to a scandal in the 1700s, likely a theft or betrayal that set this feud in motion. Watson leaned over the table, peering at the sketch. Could the ring itself be a key? You mentioned a hidden lock in the manor. Holmes nodded. Possibly, but the ring's inscription and this crest suggest something. More a hidden truth, perhaps a document or artifact that could ruin the Harrows' reputation. Clara's disappearance is no accident. She was either fleeing to protect this secret or was taken to prevent its exposure. The coded message from the séance lay beside the sketch, its cryptic symbols taunting them. Holmes had deciphered it as coordinates to an abandoned chapel on the outskirts of London, a place known for its association with smugglers and secret societies. This chapel, Holmes said, is no coincidence. It's a meeting place, a neutral ground for those who wish to remain unseen. Clara may be there, or someone who knows her fate. Watson rubbed his chin, his military instincts kicking in. If it's a meeting, we could be walking into a trap. Should we inform Lestrade? Holmes shook his head. Not yet. We need evidence. Not conjecture. Lestrade's men would blunder in and scatter our quarry. We go alone, Watson, and we go prepared. They spent the next hour preparing for the journey. Watson checked his revolver, ensuring it was loaded, while Holmes pocketed a small toolkit lockpicks, a magnifying glass, and a notebook for recording observations. The duplicate ring remained in Holmes' possession, a tangible link to the mystery's heart. As they set out for the chapel, the fog thickened, wrapping London in a ghostly veil. The cab ride to the outskirts was silent, each man lost in thought. Watson considered the possibility of Clara's survival, wondering if her disappearance was a desperate act of self-preservation. Holmes, meanwhile, was piecing together the puzzle in his mind, each clue a thread in a tapestry of deception. The chapel loomed ahead, its spire barely visible through the mist. It was a crumbling relic, its stained glass windows shattered, its walls overgrown with ivy. The coordinates from the coded message led them to a side entrance, half hidden by brambles. Holmes knelt, examining the ground. "Fresh footprints," he whispered. "Someone's been here recently." Watson gripped his revolver, his heart pounding. "Clara, or her captor," Holmes replied, his voice steady. "Stay close, Watson. The truth is near, but so is danger." They pushed open the door, its hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dark, the air heavy with the scent of damp stone and decay. A faint light flickered at the far end, where an altar stood, draped in shadows. Holmes moved forward, his steps silent, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement. A figure emerged from the darkness, a woman, her face veiled, her dress tattered, but unmistakably a wedding gown. Watson gasped, his mind flashing to the phantom bride legend. "Holmes, is that—" "Quiet," Holmes hissed, his hand raised. The figure turned, and for a moment her eyes met Holmes'. Then, with a cry, she bolted toward a hidden door behind the altar. "After her!" Holmes shouted, sprinting forward. Watson followed, his boots echoing on the stone floor. The chase led them through a maze of corridors, the chapel's underbelly a labyrinth of forgotten passages. The woman was fast, but Holmes was relentless, his long strides closing the gap. They burst into a small chamber, where the woman stood cornered, her veil now discarded. It was Lady Clara, her face pale but defiant, her eyes blazing with determination. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I knew you'd find me, Lady Clara," Holmes said, catching his breath. "Why did you flee? And where is the ring?" Clara's gaze dropped to her hand, where the emerald-encrusted ring glinted. "I had to protect it," she said. "Thomas Langley threatened me, said he'd ruin Edward if I didn't return it. But it's more than a ring, it's proof of a crime, a theft that could destroy the Harrow name." Holmes stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "And the phantom bride, a ruse to cover your escape?" Clara nodded. "I used the legend to my advantage. I needed time to find the truth. My brother James helped me hide here. He's been watching Thomas, trying to uncover his plans." Watson lowered his revolver, his relief palpable. "You're safe now, Lady Clara, but we must know everything. Who else is involved?" Before Clara could answer, a shadow moved in the doorway. A masked figure, cloaked in black, lunged forward, a knife gleaming in their hand. Watson shouted, raising his revolver. But Holmes was faster, tackling the figure to the ground. A brief struggle ensued, the knife clattering across the floor. Holmes pinned the attacker, tearing off the mask to reveal a face Watson didn't recognize, a young man, his features twisted with anger. "James!" Clara cried, rushing forward. Holmes held the man down, his voice calm but commanding. "Explain yourself, sir. Are you Clara's brother, or another pawn in this game?" The man glared but said nothing. Clara knelt beside him, her eyes filled with tears. "James, why? You were supposed to protect me." Holmes stood, dusting off his coat. "We have much to discuss, Lady Clara. But first, we secure this man and the ring." Watson bind his hands. "We return to Baker Street. Our answers lie there." As they escorted Clara and her brother from the chapel, the fog began to lift, revealing the first hints of dawn. The ring, still on Clara's finger, seemed to pulse with secrets yet untold. Holmes' mind was already racing ahead, piecing together the final threads of the mystery. Thomas Langley, the duplicate ring, the coded message, and now James all were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a deeper conspiracy. Back at Baker Street, Holmes sat by the fire, the ring and the locket from the chapel laid out before him. Clara, exhausted but safe, recounted her story, her discovery of the ring's history, her fear of Thomas Langley's threats, and her brother's desperate plan to forge a duplicate to appease him. James, now unbound but under Watson's watchful eye, remained silent, his motives unclear. "The locket," Holmes said, holding it up. "It contains a photograph of you and James, Clara. But there's more, a hidden compartment, perhaps." He pried open the locket, revealing a tiny slip of paper. Unfolding it, he read aloud, "Meet at the docks, midnight, bring the ring." Watson frowned. Another meeting. But who sent this? Holmes' eyes gleamed. Not Thomas Langley. "This is written in a different hand, someone within Harrow Manor, I suspect. Margaret, perhaps, or another ally we've yet to uncover." Clara gasped. "Margaret? She was always cold to me, but I never thought." Holmes stood, his energy renewed. "We have a rendezvous to keep, Watson. The docks, midnight, the real ring, the forged letter, and now this message all point to a final confrontation. Clara, you'll remain here with Mrs. Hudson. James, you're coming with us. Your role in this is far from clear." As they prepared to leave, Watson couldn't shake the feeling that the mystery was far from solved. The ring, the feud, the phantom bridal were threads in a web that stretched beyond the Langleys and Harrows. Someone, somewhere, was orchestrating this chaos, and Holmes was determined to unmask them. The docks awaited, a stage for the final act in the enigma of the Phantom Bride's lost ring. Chapter Joe, the Seance Deception. The fog clung to London's streets like a conspirator, shrouding the gaslit alleys in a haze that seemed to pulse with secrets. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped out of their hansom cab, the wheels clattering, to a stop outside a nondescript building in a less reputable corner of the city. The sign above the door, faded but legible, read Madame Vesper's Spiritual Emporium. Its chipped gold lettering promised communion with the beyond, a lure for the desperate and the curious. Holmes' sharp eyes scanned the facade, noting the drawn curtains and the faint flicker of candlelight seeping through the cracks. "Another charlatan peddling hope to the gullible," Holmes muttered, adjusting his coat against the damp chill. "But Margaret's tip about this place is too precise to ignore. She's either leading us to Clara or laying a trap." Watson, clutching his medical bag as if it were a talisman, frowned. "You think Margaret's involved beyond her evasions? She seemed more jealous than cunning." "Jealousy breeds cunning, Watson," Holmes replied, his voice low. "Her mention of this séance was too deliberate, too convenient. We shall see what Madame Vesper's parlour reveals." The door creaked as they entered, revealing a dim interior heavy with the scent of incense and wax. A young woman, clad in a black dress with a high collar, greeted them with a practiced smile. "Gentlemen, welcome." Are you here for Madame Vesper's communion with the spirits? Holmes' lips twitched, a fleeting smirk. Indeed, we seek answers from the other side. I trust Madame Vesper is prepared for inquisitive guests. The woman's smile faltered but held. Of course, sir, follow me. She led them through a narrow hallway adorned with velvet drapes and portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to watch their progress. The air grew thicker, the incense cloying, as they entered a circular room. A round table dominated the space, draped in dark cloth and surrounded by mismatched chairs. Candles flickered on a sideboard, casting shadows that danced across the walls. 5 other attendees sat waiting, a nervous-looking clerk, a widow in mourning black, a portly merchant, a young woman with anxious eyes, and an older man with a skeptical scowl. Madame Vesper herself stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding despite her diminutive frame. Her silver hair was piled high, and her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, fixed on Holmes and Watson as they took their seats. "Welcome, seekers of truth," Madame Vesper intoned, her voice smooth and theatrical. "Tonight we call upon the spirits to guide us. The veil is thin, and the phantom bride of Harrow Manor may deign to speak." Watson shifted uncomfortably, his rational mind warring with the eerie atmosphere. Holmes, however, sat with the calm of a predator, his fingers steepled, his gaze dissecting every detail: the medium's calculated gestures, the attendees' nervous tics, the faint creak of floorboards beneath the carpet. The séance began. With a ritualistic flourish, Madame Vesper lit a single black candle, its flame casting a sickly glow. She clasped hands with the attendees, forming a circle, and instructed them to close their eyes. Holmes complied, but Watson caught the glint of his half-open lids, ever watchful. The medium chanted, her voice rising and falling in a cadence designed to mesmerize. The room seemed to grow colder, the candlelight dimming as if by design. "Spirit of the phantom bride," Madame Vesper called, "reveal yourself. Share your sorrow, your truth." A soft moan echoed, seemingly from nowhere. The widow gasped, and the clerk's hands trembled. Watson's grip on Holmes' hand tightened, but Holmes remained still, his head tilted as if tracing the sound's origin. Then a faint knock once, twice rattled the table. The young woman squeaked, and the merchant muttered a prayer. "Clara, Harrow, are you with us?" Madame Vesper pressed, her voice quivering with feigned emotion. "Speak, lost bride." The table shuddered, a low groan emanating from its center. Watson's pulse quickened, but Holmes' expression remained impassive. He leaned slightly, his ear attuned to a faint mechanical click beneath the table. His lips curled into a faint smile. Suddenly, a spectral figure appeared in the corner. Shimmering form in a tattered wedding veil, its edges glowing faintly in the candlelight. The widow screamed, and the clerk bolted upright, knocking over his chair. Watson's hand went to his revolver, but Holmes' grip stayed him. "Remarkable," Holmes murmured, his voice barely audible. "Phosphorescent paint and a hidden projector. Crude, but effective." The figure moved, gliding toward the table. Its veil fluttered as if caught in a breeze, and a hollow voice whispered, "The ring. The ring holds the truth, ... The attendees were in chaos, some frozen, others clutching each other. Madame Vesper's eyes gleamed with triumph, but Holmes stood abruptly, breaking the circle. He strode to the spectral figure, his cane tapping the floor. With a swift motion, he yanked aside a curtain behind the apparition, revealing a concealed alcove. A young man, startled, dropped a small projector device, its lens still glowing. The phantom bride vanished, replaced by a blank wall smeared with glowing paint. "Enough of this farce," Holmes declared, his voice cutting through the gasps and murmurs. "Madame Vesper, your theatrics are impressive, but your compliance is less discreet." The medium's composure cracked, her eyes darting to the young man, who scrambled to his feet. This is outrageous," she sputtered. "You dare disrupt the spirits." "The only spirits here are those of deception," Holmes retorted. He turned to the young man, now pale and cornered. "You, sir, will explain the mechanism of this projection and its purpose." "Now," the man stammered, I was paid. Just a job, sir. Madame Vesper said it was to comfort the grieving." Holmes' gaze shifted to the medium, who was edging toward a side door. "Watson, secure that exit," he said calmly. Watson moved swiftly, blocking her path. The attendees, now realizing the fraud, began to murmur angrily. But Holmes raised a hand for silence. "Madame Vesper," he said, "your performance was meant to reinforce the Phantom Bride legend, no doubt to distract from a more tangible crime, but you've left a clue more telling than your spectral puppetry." He reached beneath the table, his fingers finding a hidden compartment. From it, he withdrew a small wooden box, its surface etched with occult symbols. Inside was a folded paper, its edges worn but intact. Holmes unfolded it, his eyes scanning the text. "A coded message," he said, holding it to the candlelight. "Coordinates, if I'm not mistaken, and at time midnight, tomorrow, at an abandoned chapel outside London. Care to explain, Madame Vesper?" The medium's defiance crumbled. "I don't know what you're talking about," she insisted. But her trembling hands betrayed her. Holmes turned to the attendees. "This séance was a diversion, ladies and gentlemen, likely to conceal a meeting tied to Lady Clara disappearance. I suggest you demand your fees returned and leave this den of charlatans." The group erupted in demands, but Holmes and Watson were already moving. They escorted Madame Vesper and her accomplice to a back room, away from the chaos. Watson kept his revolver at the ready, though Holmes seemed unconcerned. "Now," Holmes said, seating himself opposite the medium, "you will tell me who paid. You two staged this spectacle and why they wanted the Phantom Bride legend amplified. Refuse, and Scotland Yard will be most interested in your little enterprise." Madame Vesper's shoulders slumped. "It was a woman," she admitted, her voice low. "She didn't give her name, but she paid handsomely. Said to make the phantom bridge tale convincing, to keep people talking about the ghost. She gave me the coordinates, said someone would meet there tomorrow night." "Describe her," Holmes pressed. "Tall, dark hair, sharp features, wore a green cloak, expensive. She was cold, like she was used to giving orders." Holmes exchanged a glance with Watson. "Margaret," Watson whispered. "It fits her description." "Possibly," Holmes said, his tone cautious, "but we mustn't leap to conclusions. The coordinates are our next step." He turned back to Madame Vesper. "You'll remain here until the police arrive. Watson, ensure she doesn't slip away." As Watson stood guard, Holmes examined the coded message further. The coordinates pointed to a chapel in the countryside, long abandoned and rumored to be haunted, a perfect meeting place for a clandestine rendezvous. The paper bore traces of lavender scent, faint but unmistakable, matching the clue from the reception hall. Holmes' mind raced, piecing together the threads: Clara's disappearance, the ring's disputed ownership, Margaret's evasions, And now this staged séance. Someone was orchestrating a narrative, but to what end? They left the parlor as the police arrived, summoned by a runner Holmes had dispatched earlier. The fog had thickened, cloaking the streets in an almost impenetrable veil. Watson shivered, pulling his coat tighter. "Holmes, do you think Clara's alive, hiding at this chapel?" "Alive, yes," Holmes replied, hailing another cab. "Hiding, perhaps. The ring is the key not just to her disappearance, but to a deeper motive. The séance was meant to keep us chasing ghosts, but it's led us to something far more corporeal." The cab rattled through the night, carrying them toward Baker Street. Holmes leaned back, his eyes half closed, but his mind was alight, sifting through the clues. The coded message, the lavender scent, the duplicate ring from Thomas Langley, all pointed to a convergence at the chapel. But whose hand was guiding these events? Margaret, with her jealousy, Thomas, with his vendetta, or someone yet unseen, pulling strings from the shadows? Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread the coded message on his desk, its cryptic symbols illuminated by the glow of his lamp. He fetched a map of London and its outskirts, plotting the coordinates with precision. The chapel lay in a desolate stretch of land, its ruins a relic of a forgotten parish. Watson watched as Holmes traced the lines, his fingers moving with the certainty of a cartographer. "Midnight tomorrow," Holmes said, tapping the map. "We'll need to be there early, Watson. An ambush, not a confrontation. Whoever arranged this meeting expects secrecy, and we shall grant them none." Watson nodded, though unease gnawed at him. "And if it's a trap?" "Then we spring it," Holmes said, a glint in his eye. "But first, we prepare. The ring, the note, the veil all lead to this chapel. Clara may be there, or she may not, but the truth will be." The night stretched on, the fog pressing against the windows of 2-1B Baker Street. Holmes smoked his pipe, the curls of smoke weaving patterns in the air as he retreated into his mind palace. Watson, ever loyal, began cleaning his revolver, ready for whatever lay ahead. The séance had been a deception, but it had yielded a vital clue. The chapel awaited, and with it, the next piece of the puzzle in the enigma of the phantom bride's lost ring. The following day dawned grey and heavy, the sky a leaden canopy over London. Holmes and Watson spent the morning preparing, gathering supplies for a nighttime venture. Holmes packed a small kit of tools, lockpicks, a pocket lantern, and a notebook for recording observations. Watson ensured his medical bag was stocked, anticipating the possibility of conflict. By late afternoon, they were on a train bound for the outskirts of the city, the rhythmic clatter of the rails a counterpoint to their silence. The countryside unfolded in patches of mist and shadow, the fields giving way to gnarled trees and crumbling stone walls. The chapel, when they reached it, was a skeletal ruin, its spire broken and its windows empty sockets. Ivy clung to its walls, and the air carried the damp scent of decay. Holmes surveyed the scene, his eyes narrowing as he noted the fresh footprints in the mud near the entrance to many for a supposedly abandoned site. "Someone's been here recently," he said, crouching to examine the tracks. "At least 3 sets, one smaller, possibly a woman's. Clara, perhaps, or a mysterious green-cloaked benefactor." Watson scanned the horizon, his hand resting on his revolver. "It feels like we're walking into a lion's den, Holmes, or a stage," Holmes replied, standing. "Every clue has been a performance, the séance, the legend, even Clara's disappearance. We're about to meet the director." They concealed themselves in a copse of trees near the chapel, the shadows providing cover as dusk fell. Holmes lit his lantern, keeping the beam low, and they waited. The hours crept by, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Watson's nerves frayed, but Holmes remained a statue, his focus unbroken. At 11:30, a figure approached a woman, her green cloak vivid even in the dim light. Holmes tensed, recognizing the description from Madame Vesper. She moved cautiously, pausing to scan the surroundings before entering the chapel. Moments later, another figure emerged from the opposite direction, a man, his face obscured by a scarf, carrying a small satchel. He slipped inside, and the faint glow of a lantern flickered within the ruins. "Now," Watson Holmes whispered, rising. They moved swiftly, their footsteps silent on the damp grass. Holmes signaled for Watson to flank the entrance while he approached the broken window. Peering inside, he saw the woman Margaret, unmistakably speaking in hushed tones to the man who was unpacking the satchel. A glint of metal caught the lighter knife, or perhaps a tool. Holmes gestured to Watson, and they entered the chapel, their presence masked by the creak of the wind through the ruins. Margaret's voice was sharp, laced with urgency. "You have it, the real one, not that forgery." The man nodded, producing a ring from the satchel. It gleamed in the lantern light, its emerald catching the glow. "As promised. But where's my payment?" Holmes stepped forward, his voice like a blade. "Your payment, sir, may be a cell in Scotland Yard unless you explain yourself." Margaret gasped, spinning to face him, while the man froze, the ring clutched in his hand. Watson leveled his revolver, his expression grim. "Drop it," he said, nodding at the satchel. The man hesitated, then complied, the satchel hitting the floor with a thud. Margaret's eyes darted between Holmes and the door, but Watson's presence blocked her escape. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice trembling but defiant, "you're meddling in matters you don't understand." "On the contrary," Holmes said, stepping closer, "I understand perfectly. You orchestrated the séance to perpetuate the phantom bride myth, hoping to distract from your scheme to steal the ring. But whose hand holds the true motive, yours or his?" He nodded at the man, who was slowly unwinding his scarf, revealing a face Holmes recognized: Thomas Langley. "Langley," Holmes said, his tone almost admiring, "you've played your part well. A duplicate ring to deceive Clara, a letter to lure her into hiding, and now this rendezvous to secure the original. But why involve Margaret?" Thomas sneered, his bravado returning. "She wanted the harrow. Fortune, I wanted the ring, my family's rightful property. We had ... mutual interests." Margaret's face twisted with rage. "You liar, you said you'd share the profits." Holmes raised a hand, silencing them. "Enough. The ring, Langley. Hand it over." Thomas hesitated, then tossed it to Holmes, who caught it deftly. He examined it, noting the familiar crest and the emerald's unique cut. "The original," he confirmed, "but this meeting wasn't just about the ring, was it? There's another player in this game." As if on cue, a shadow moved in the doorway, a figure in a hooded cloak, its face obscured. Watson turned, his revolver trained, but Holmes raised a hand. "Hold, Watson. Let's see who joins the cast." The figure stepped forward, lowering the hood to reveal Clara Harrow, her face pale but resolute. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice steady, "I knew you'd find me." Watson lowered his weapon, stunned. "Clara, you're alive, indeed." Holmes said, his eyes never leaving her. And you've been hiding, haven't you? Protecting the ring, or perhaps protecting a secret tied to it. Clara nodded, her gaze flickering to Thomas and Margaret. I found out about the ring's history, how the Harrows stole it from the Langleys. Thomas threatened me, said he'd ruin Edward if I didn't return it. I fled to keep it safe until I could prove the truth. Holmes held up the ring. And this meeting you're doing? My brother, James, Clara said. He's been helping me. He arranged this to trap Thomas and Margaret, but I didn't expect you to be here. Holmes' eyes gleamed. A commendable plan, but incomplete. Margaret, your jealousy led you to betray your cousin. Thomas, your greed drove you to threats. But there's a third piece to this puzzle. James, where is he? Before Clara could answer, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts and the sound of running footsteps echoed through the chapel. Holmes moved to the door, Watson at his side, just as a group of men burst in Thomas's hired thugs, their faces grim. A fight broke out, chaotic and brutal. Watson fired a warning shot, scattering the men, while Holmes grappled with one, disarming him with a swift jab of his cane. In the chaos, Thomas lunged for the ring, but Clara was faster, snatching it from Holmes' hand. No, she cried, backing toward the altar. This ends now. Margaret screamed, lunging at Clara, but Watson tackled her, pinning her to the ground. Thomas, seeing his plan unravel, bolted for the door, only to be tripped by Holmes' outstretched cane. The thugs, outnumbered and outmatched, fled into the night as the dust settled. Holmes retrieved the ring from Clara, who was trembling but unharmed. You've played a dangerous game, Lady Clara, he said, his tone not unkind, but your courage has preserved the truth. Watson secured Margaret and Thomas, binding their hands with cord from Holmes' kit. Clara sank to her knees, exhaustion overtaking her. James was supposed to be here, she whispered. He promised to meet me. Holmes' expression softened, but only for a moment. We'll find him, he said, but first we return to London. The ring, the documents, and these two will go to Scotland Yard. The Phantom Bride's tale ends tonight. They left the chapel, the fog swallowing the ruins behind them. Clara walked between Holmes and Watson, the ring clutched tightly in her hand. The coded message had led them here, but the mystery was far from over. James, the locket, the Langley feudal lingered in Holmes' mind, pieces of a puzzle yet to be fully assembled. As the train carried them back to the city, Holmes stared out at the passing shadows, already planning his next move. Holmes nodded, his gaze shifting to Langley. And you, Mr. Langley? You thought blackmail and threats would restore your family's honor, or was it the emerald's value that truly motivated you? Langley's face flushed. You know nothing of my family's suffering. That ring was ours, stolen by the Harrows to fund their empire. Clara was naive enough to believe she could expose them without consequences. The masked figure suddenly stepped forward, their voice muffled but firm. Enough, Thomas, you've gone too far. Holmes' eyes gleamed. And you, my mysterious friend, have been remarkably silent. Care to reveal yourself? Before the figure could respond, a loud crack echoed through the chapel as the door behind them burst open. Two burly men, clearly Langley's hired muscle, stormed in, brandishing clubs. Watson raised his revolver, but Holmes remained calm, his mind racing. Watson, the candles. Holmes shouted. Watson understood immediately. He fired a single shot, not at the men, but at the candelabra above the altar. It crashed to the ground, extinguishing most of the light and plunging the chapel into near darkness. Chaos erupted. Clara screamed, Langley shouted, and the masked figure lunged toward Clara, pulling her behind the altar. Holmes moved like a shadow, his movements precise despite the darkness. He tackled one of the thugs, using the man's momentum to send him crashing into a pew. Watson grappled with the second, his military training serving him well as he disarmed the man with a swift blow to the wrist in the dim light. Holmes saw the masked figure ushering Clara toward a side door. "Watson, secure Langley," he called, sprinting after them. Langley, realizing the tide had turned, attempted to flee, but Watson was faster. He grabbed Langley by the collar, pinning him against the wall. "Stay put," Watson growled, his revolver pressed against Langley's chest. Holmes reached the side door just as the masked figure and Clara slipped outside. He followed, emerging into the misty night. The figure was helping Clara into a waiting carriage, but they froze as Holmes approached. "Stop," Holmes commanded. "There's no need to run, Clara, and you remove the mask. I suspect I know who you are, but I'd prefer confirmation." The figure hesitated, then slowly pulled off the mask, revealing a young man with sharp features and haunted eyes. Clara gasped, "James." Holmes nodded, unsurprised. "James, Lady Clara's estranged brother, I presume. Your involvement explains much, though not everything." James glared at Holmes, his arm protectively around Clara. "I was keeping her safe. Thomas would have killed her for that ring." Clara's voice trembled. "James found me after I fled the reception. He knew about the ring's history, the feud. He told me to hide until we could expose the truth." Holmes' gaze softened slightly. "A noble intent, but poorly executed. You've put your sister in greater danger by keeping her in the dark. And the ring, where is it?" Clara reached into her cloak, producing the emerald-encrusted heirloom. It glinted faintly in the moonlight, its intricate engraving catching Holmes' eye. "I kept. It's safe," she said. "It's the key to ending this feud." Before Holmes could respond, a shout came from the chapel. Watson emerged, dragging a struggling Langley. "He's not going anywhere," Watson said, his grip firm. Holmes turned back to Clara and James. "We return to London," he said. "There are still pieces of this puzzle to fit together, and I suspect the ring holds one final secret." As they boarded the carriage, a glint on the ground caught Holmes' attention. He knelt, picking up a small locket that had fallen during the scuffle. It was silver, worn, and bore a faint engraving. He opened it, revealing a photograph of Clara and a younger James, taken years ago. Holmes' lips curved into a faint smile. "A sentimental clue," he murmured, pocketing it. The carriage rattled back toward London, the night still cloaked in mist. Holmes sat in silence, his mind already piecing together the next steps. Clara's disappearance was solved, but the ring's true secret and the identity of the masked figures, motives remained just out of reach. For now, he had Clara, James, and Langley, and the ring itself. The final act of this mystery was yet to unfold. The journey back was tense, with Langley's sullen silence and Clara's anxious glances at her brother. Watson kept a watchful eye on their prisoners, while Holmes stared out the window, his mind a whirlwind of deductions. The chapel confrontation had confirmed much but raised new questions. Why had James forged a duplicate ring? Who else knew? Clara was alive, and what role did Margaret, Lord Edward's jealous cousin, play in this tangled web? As the carriage crossed the Thames, the city's lights flickering in the distance, Holmes leaned toward Watson. "We're close, old friend," he said softly. "But the game is not yet over." Watson nodded, his expression grim. "What's next?" Holmes' eyes gleamed. "We return to Baker Street. There we'll unravel the final threads of this Enigma and ensure the Phantom Bride's legend is laid to rest." The carriage rolled on, carrying them toward the heart of London and the resolution of a mystery that had begun with a missing bride and a cursed ring. The chapel confrontation had been a turning point, but the truth, as always, lay in the details Holmes had yet to uncover. Chapter 10. The Chapel Confrontation. The night was heavy with mist as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson made their way through the winding lanes on the outskirts of London. The air was damp, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, and the distant hum of the city had faded into an eerie silence. Their destination was an abandoned chapel. Its location gleaned from the coded message Holmes had deciphered in the spiritualist's parlor. The coordinates had been precise, scrawled in a hurried hand, and they pointed to this desolate place, a crumbling relic of a forgotten parish nestled in a copse of gnarled oaks. Holmes, clad in his dark overcoat, moved with purpose, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. Watson followed closely, his revolver tucked discreetly in his coat pocket, his senses heightened by the weight of the mystery they were unraveling. The cryptic clues, a note, the veil, the key. The Langley ring had converged on this moment, and both men knew that the truth about Lady Clara's disappearance and the missing Harrow ring lay just ahead. The chapel loomed into view, its silhouette jagged against the moonlit sky. Its spire was broken, and ivy clung to the weathered stone walls, as if nature itself were reclaiming the forgotten structure. The windows were dark, some shattered, and the heavy wooden door hung slightly, ajar, creaking faintly in the breeze. Holmes paused, his gloved hand raised to signal silence. Watson's breath caught as he strained to listen, detecting the faint murmur of voices from within. "They're already here," Holmes whispered, his voice low but steady. "We must proceed with caution. Whoever is inside may be armed, and Clara, if she is here, may be in danger." Watson nodded, his grip tightening on the revolver. "Do you think it's Langley, or someone else?" Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Langley is likely, but the masked figure we've yet to identify complicates matters. Stay alert, Watson. This may be a trap." They crept toward the chapel, keeping to the shadows of the oaks. Holmes examined the ground, noting fresh footprints. In the mud, two sets, one heavy and deliberate, the other lighter and hurried. He crouched, inspecting them closely. "A man and a woman," he murmured. "The woman's steps are uneven, as if she were running or being coerced." Watson's heart sank. "Clara, possibly," Holmes replied, standing. "But we'll—" "No, soon enough." They reached the door, and Holmes eased it open, the hinges groaning softly. The interior was dimly lit by flickering candlelight, casting long shadows across the pews. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and wax. At the far end of the chapel, near a crumbling altar, stood three figures. Holmes and Watson ducked behind a pew, peering through the gloom. One figure was unmistakably Lady Clara Harrow. Her wedding veil was gone, replaced by a simple cloak, but her posture graceful, yet tense, was unmistakable. She stood with her hands clasped, her face pale but resolute. Opposite her was Thomas Langley, his gaunt frame and bitter expression illuminated by the candles. His voice was sharp, carrying across the chapel. You have it, Clara, Langley said, his tone laced with venom. The ring belongs to my family. Hand it over, and this ends peacefully. Clara shook her head, her voice steady despite the tension. You know why I can't, Thomas. The ring holds more than your family's claim holds the truth about the Harrow's deceit. I won't let you bury it. The third figure, cloaked and masked, stood silently near the altar, a dark presence that seemed to unsettle both Clara and Langley. Holmes' eyes gleamed with interest as he studied the figure, noting the way they moved, lithe, deliberate, almost protective of Clara. Holmes leaned toward Watson. The masked figure is our wild card. They haven't spoken, but their presence suggests they're either an ally to Clara or a threat to both. We must act swiftly. Watson nodded, his jaw set. What's the plan? We interrupt, Holmes said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. But with precision. Follow my lead. Holmes stood, stepping into the candlelight with a calm authority that commanded attention. Good evening, Mr. Langley, he called, his voice echoing through the chapel. And Lady Clara, I trust we're not interrupting anything too pressing. Langley spun around, his face contorting with rage. Clara gasped, her eyes widening with a mix of relief and fear. The masked figure stiffened but did not move, their hand hovering near their side as if reaching for a weapon. Holmes, Langley, spat. This is none of your concern. Leave, or you'll regret it. Holmes strolled forward, his hands clasped behind his back, exuding an air of unshakable confidence. On the contrary, Mr. Langley, this is very much my concern. A missing bride, a stolen ring, and a rather theatrical legend about a phantom bride. It's precisely the sort of puzzle I find irresistible. Watson followed, his revolver now visible but held low, a silent warning. Clara's eyes darted between Holmes and the masked figure, as if unsure whom to trust. Langley's hand twitched toward his coat, but Holmes raised a finger. I wouldn't, Mr. Langley, Holmes said sharply. Dr. Watson is an excellent shot, and I assure you, we are not here to negotiate. Langley froze, his eyes narrowing. What do you want, Holmes? The truth, Holmes replied. And the ring. Lady Clara, perhaps you'd care to explain why you've been hiding in this charming ruin. Clara hesitated, glancing at the masked figure. I had to protect the ring, she said finally. Thomas threatened me. He said if I didn't return it to the Langleys, he'd ruin Edward's family. But the ring, it's proof the Harrows stole it from the Langleys centuries ago. I couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands.